He defeated the Demon King, saved another world, and returned home stronger than anyone alive. But when dungeons appeared on Earth, his mark showed only level 1. To the world, he's weak, but he knows he's unrivaled. Armed with knowledge no one else has, he turns to the camera, teaching, guiding, and profiting as the world's first dungeon influencer. Can the world's weakest adventurer become its most influential hero? Let's find out. This story begins with the protagonist, Ryoji Furuyari, thinking a dungeon had appeared out of nowhere. Why would a dungeon suddenly appear in modern-day Japan? It looked very similar to the one he'd seen in another world. He didn't like it. He'd seen this dungeon before. 2 weeks ago, during summer break before 9th grade, he fell into a pit that appeared beneath his feet. When he came to his senses, he realized that he entered another world. Before him sat the king on his throne, flanked by guards and an advisor. His Majesty addressed the protagonist and said that they had summoned him, a brave warrior, to this world to save it from extinction. The king asked the protagonist to defeat the demon lord and save their world. Ryoji, surprised, asked him, "What?" But he didn't want to and he couldn't. His Majesty exclaimed in bewilderment. What did he say? The protagonist explained to him that he had entrance exams next year and had to return to school in 2 weeks, so please let them return him to his world. At that moment, Princess Daenerys approached him and told him not to worry, he would return to his world. The king called his daughter by name and the advisor politely greeted her according to her rank. MC, looking at her, noted that she was a typical isekai princess. The girl continued, but the magic of moving between worlds requires a lot of mana stones, so first he would have to collect them. The protagonist asked her how long it would take. Daenerys said, since they used all their mana stones to summon him, if you think about it, it would take about 50 years. She added, unless of course, the demon lord exterminated them by then. The protagonist stared at her, dumbfounded. 50 years? Is there no way to speed it up? The girl told him that if he defeated the demon lord, he could go home immediately, as he would likely receive a very large mana stone for defeating him. MC was simply forced to agree. A few months later, while fighting another monster, he thought, so that's how he signed up to defeat the demon lord and return home. He was summoned to this world because of his immense potential, so he began to develop it to become the warrior everyone envisioned. After defeating the monster, the protagonist felt his strength waning. He was surprised to notice that the princess had activated her healing skill, and he regained his strength. The protagonist thanked her for this. Daenerys admonished him that he would have to train hard if he wanted to become a great warrior. She was very worried when a level 1 slime nearly killed him. The protagonist indignantly remarked that he was still a schoolboy, so she should tone down her ardor. Ryoji added that he felt like he was getting stronger, but it would be more practical if there was at least some level indication. He just had to be careful. He wondered why she had come with him. The princess smiled and asked him if he was worried about her. He shouldn't worry. Low-level monsters weren't a problem for her. The protagonist thought, she's much stronger than him. The girl continued, he lacked stamina. Once he built it up, he'd be able to fight non-stop. She suggested he focus on that. MC gloomily asked her if she could go easy on him. Daenerys said she'd help him until he learned to heal himself. She couldn't let him die, so he could thank her. The protagonist sarcastically thanked her. A year later, after defeating another monster, the protagonist exclaimed, wow. He defeated a low-level boss and completed the dungeon. Daenerys quipped that she never thought it would take him a whole year to complete the first dungeon. What awaited them next? The protagonist replied that he knew healing magic now, so he'd complete the next dungeon much faster. He knew how to heal himself now, didn't he? The girl asked him what he'd do when he ran out of mana. Had he even thought about that? The protagonist, puzzled, replied that he didn't know. The princess said she'd accompany him until he learned how to make potions. She added that relying on healing magic alone was foolish. The MC thanked her, wondering if she was a tsundere. 6 months later, after defeating another enemy, the protagonist exclaimed, excellent. The second dungeon is complete. Now he can make healing potions too. The princess advised him not to get too cocky. There were still plenty of dungeons left. The protagonist asked her in surprise, do they really have to go through them all? The main thing is defeating the Demon King. The rest isn't that important, right? Daenerys replied that the Demon Lord was incomparable to dungeon bosses. Until he cleared all dungeons, he shouldn't even think about Demon Lord. He remarked that it sounded hard. The girl said she didn't want him to die, so they should train harder. MC looked at her in confusion and asked if she really had to go with him. The princess remarked irritably, he doesn't understand, does he? What if he runs out of mana? Healing potions don't restore mana, so she'll accompany him until he learns how to make mana potions. The protagonist thought with resignation, she's definitely a tsundere. 5 years later, something unexpected happened. A monster in the form of a huge dragon almost attacked the princess. She froze in surprise. MC saw this, cursed, and rushed to Daenerys' aid. Having defeated the enemy, he remarked that it was close. It was good that he had done so in time. Moving on, the protagonist said they had already completed half the dungeons. If they continued like this, in his opinion, they could fight the Demon Lord in just 2 years. The princess thoughtfully called him by name and seemed to express that she had become a burden to him. The protagonist confessed to her that, with his current abilities, it was difficult for him to simultaneously fight monsters and protect her. Since he could now make mana potions, it would be better if she stayed home. The girl indignantly pushed him. The protagonist, perplexed, asked her what she was doing. The princess irritably remarked, "What did he just say?" The protagonist, perplexed, remarked that he would be glad if she stayed with him, for which he was very grateful. Daenerys giggled contentedly in response. She told him the people of this world couldn't defeat the Demon King, but she knew he could. The protagonist replied that he would try his best. He thought about it, but he really wanted to go home. The princess told him she would be waiting for him in her castle. Without going into unnecessary details, 10 years passed. The protagonist narrowly escaped death more than once, but he still managed to defeat the Demon Lord. He arrived at the king's castle, and His Majesty addressed him as the great warrior Ryojo, declaring that he had saved them from the Demon Lord's oppression. He added that on behalf of all the inhabitants of this world, they thanked him heartily. The king gave him a meaningful look and continued, "But did he still wish to return to his world? As the king of this country, he would be very happy if he married his daughter and took the throne." Daenerys lowered her head in embarrassment, a blush blooming on her cheeks. The protagonist thanked His Majesty for his kind words and told him he very much wanted to return home and see his family again. The princess, saying goodbye to her hope, could not hold back her tears. The advisor placed his hand on her shoulder in support. The girl found the strength to activate the magic circle and cast the spell. The protagonist waved his hand at her and asked her to take care of herself. She irritably answered him to shut up already and go back to his world. A bright glow appeared, and the protagonist fell into emptiness. When he could see something, he realized he was standing on the street of his hometown, and so he returned to his world. Kayoko Mitsuhashi appeared next to him, asking if everything was all right. The protagonist exclaimed her name in surprise. He recognized her. They had known each other since first grade. In other words, she's his childhood friend. He told her she hasn't changed at all, but why is she still wearing her school uniform? The girl looked at him in amazement and asked him what he said. It turned out that in his world, the 10 years he spent in another world hadn't passed at all, and he hadn't aged a day. MC asked her for a mirror for a second. When he looked at his reflection, he thought the tsundere princess had brought him back in time when he was still an 8th grader. Well, that's not all that important. The main thing is that he returned home. The protagonist found his house with a sign. Sometime later, sitting at the table with his mother, he looked at her carefully. She asked him what was wrong. Was there food left on her lips? The protagonist answered with a smile that it wasn't so. It's just that so much time had passed. He had been in another world for so many years. His mother looked at him in surprise, then giggled in surprise, wondering what he was talking about. Was he having a bad dream? The protagonist thought he should have expected such a reaction. She mentioned, by the way, that he and his dad were going shopping, and that he should keep an eye on the house for now. MC agreed and wished them happy shopping. After his parents left, he decided to go to the store, buy some chips and a soda, and watch anime. Now he could enjoy life to his heart's content. Leaving the store, he leisurely walked home, thinking about how much he loved this world. He was so glad to be home. At that moment, Kayoko called out to him anxiously. She asked him if he was okay. His parents had been in an accident. For the protagonist, it was as if the world had turned upside down. Not believing her words, he asked her again what she said. His mom and dad had been in an accident. A short time later, he rushed to the hospital to identify the bodies. The doctors sadly told him that the car his parents were driving had collided with a truck. They had been killed instantly, and he regretted it. The protagonist was perplexed. How could this have happened? Why did it happen just as he returned? Was this some kind of joke? Suddenly, it dawned on him. It must be the Demon King's influence, or the price for defeating him. Those were the only reasons he could come up with. After the funeral, Kayoko brought his parents' ashes and said she would place this here. The protagonist thanked her for her concern and placed a second urn. Kayoko said she would bring everything else here too. The protagonist sadly looked at his parents' portraits and thought he had finally defeated the Demon King and returned here to them, but he hadn't had the chance to enjoy their family. Suddenly, there was a noise outside the door. A man's voice exclaimed indignantly. He'd already said they were his relatives. This was their family business, so they shouldn't get in their way. The door swung open, and the protagonist's aunt and uncle, along with his cousins, entered the room. The uncle greeted him and asked him how much he'd gotten from the insurance policy. It was a lot, wasn't it? MC wondered what the uncle was talking about on such a sad day. The aunt said, he knows, right? That all the insurance payments and inheritance belong to him and his uncle? Since he's still a child, he can't legally get any of it. The protagonist wondered, what on earth is that? The aunt continued that if he didn't give them the money, they would report the matter to the police. He doesn't want to end up in a juvenile detention center, does he? A stunned Kayoko peeked into the room and told MC she should probably go home. No one paid any attention to her. Her uncle said his father had an expensive watch, mind you. It'll be his. One of the cousins, Sima, said he'll take his father's signature suit then. He turned to his father and explained that he probably wouldn't fit into it, so he'll take it for himself. Ryuichi yelled at the protagonist. Why was he standing there? Let him give them the insurance money, and don't lie to them about him spending it on the funeral. Ryuni said the house will have to be transferred to them too. This isn't their whim. It's all legal. He can ask a lawyer. The aunt pestered the protagonist, asking where the jewelry is. Let him bring it to her. Sima rummaged through the closet, and MC thought irritably, well, there are relatives. What were they thinking when they barged in on him? What kind of joke is this? Ryoji told them all he couldn't do that, his parents' belongings would stay with him. The Tanahashi family froze in astonishment upon hearing his words. Ryuichi asked him, perplexed, what he'd said. His uncle was furious. Who was he arguing with? He was the head of the influential Tanakashi family. His family was a rotten branch and should obey them. Ryuni growled at the protagonist, saying he was just an insolent idiot. MC calmly replied, their arguments were so-so. They seemed like adults, but in reality, they still hadn't developed any brains. The uncle exclaimed angrily. What did he say? He angrily called his sons and ordered them to tell the protagonist a lesson. The aunt exclaimed, Ryoji is insolent, just like his parents. Ryuni asked his father if he'd give him a raise in return. Uncle said he'd raise his share. Just don't hit him in the face. The bruises shouldn't be visible. Ryuichi asked the protagonist sarcastically, are you scared yet? The cousins surrounded him. Ryuichi flexed his fists. Seima came up behind him and placed his hands firmly on his shoulders, and Ryuni angrily patted him on the head. The cousins swung their arms. What happened next? None of them understood. The brothers punched each other, while the protagonist stood calmly to the side. All the relatives looked at Ryoji in bewilderment. He thought, they're like snails. They're slower than level 2 goblins. They're even slower than slimes. The cousins approached him again, patted his shoulders. They exclaimed menacingly, what's he thinking? Hold still. The protagonist looked at them and wondered if they weren't ashamed to say such a thing. The brothers wanted to hit him again, but their fists hit the wall, and MC found himself on the sidelines again. The aunt shouted at her sons in bewilderment, asking what they were doing there. The uncle asked his offspring in amazement, is everything all right? The protagonist replied that he was fine, and that his uncle shouldn't worry about him. The man exclaimed angrily, what does this have to do with him? He and the aunt rushed to their sons. They rubbed their fists and complained to their parents that the protagonist looked like he was made of concrete. Ryoji said, well, and stepped toward the aunt and uncle. He told them they wouldn't be able to move or speak. The protagonist activated his hypnosis skill and continued that they would only answer his questions and only the truth. He said, it seems like these two have pulled this kind of thing before. Are they extorting property by deceiving people? The uncle admitted it was true with a goofy smile. He remarked, that's very impressive, isn't it? He's very cunning. A fool wouldn't think of something like that. Did his nephew agree? The protagonist thought, yeah, he didn't expect such straightforwardness. MC said, in that case, they'll fulfill some of his conditions. The relatives listened attentively. After all this, the protagonist thought the hypnosis skill hadn't been all that useful when he was fighting the Demon King and his minions. He was sure it could only be used to extract information. But the people of his world have very low resistance to magic, hence the ability's effectiveness. After some time, the uncle and his entire family brought the protagonist envelopes with condolences. The protagonist thanked them for this, adding, as expected of the head of the Tanakashi family. His aunt wanted to tell him there was more, but the protagonist interrupted her and added, yes, he could see, it was only half. His uncle thanked him for teaching their children a lesson. Ryoji told them that he was expecting the remaining donations from them, and that they did not need to visit him on the days of the memorial service. And so, his hypnotized aunt and uncle withdrew all their money from their accounts, leaving only change for transportation expenses to return home. They even took out loans according to their means, and then sent him the money in letters of condolence. The money wasn't as much as the protagonist expected, but so be it. He hoped they'd learned their lesson. MC sat down in front of his parents' portraits, and thought that if he had left with them back then, all of this could have been avoided. If his parents had lived, his uncle wouldn't have shown up. Had he done the right thing by them? Suddenly, he was overcome with sobs. The protagonist noted he'd only shed tears over his parents' ashes, but he'd held his own at the funeral. A few weeks later, on the way to school, Kyoko asked him if he'd seen the news. The protagonist asked if she meant about the good harvest this year. The girl was amazed at his ignorance. But no, the very same news. Dungeons had appeared all over the world. He asked her in surprise. Dungeons? Kyoko declared that they were, just like in the games, dungeons teeming with monsters. She continued, militaries around the world had begun exploring them, but it seemed to be all in vain. Their country's opposition party kept berating the government for allegedly unconstitutional behavior. And the opposition was no joke. With the appearance of the dungeons, all the oil and coal mines had begun to wither. This is just insane. The protagonist remarked in surprise. Seriously, Kyoko exclaimed. Experts say that if this continues, all their resources will quickly run out. What are they supposed to do? She won't survive if they all return to the Stone Age. The protagonist thought, the Stone Age? There wasn't even anime back then. The girl noted that the government is calling an emergency meeting about this, but the opposition continues to resist and protest, causing a ton of problems. The parties are protesting, and it seems they're also causing a lot of trouble. She doesn't know for sure, but they probably just don't like this policy. They say it's too arbitrary, and that there's no need for any measures. Kyoko said that the depletion of resources is definitely related to the dungeon's appearance. Otherwise, what's all this about? The protagonist thought, maybe she's right. He told her, they'll need to see what's going on there. Kyoko told him that people write all sorts of things online. The protagonist thought, obviously, he wasn't talking about the internet at all. After a while, he decided to scout out the situation. The dungeon was cordoned off by a squad of police. Walking around the dungeon, the protagonist thought, The security here is solid, everyone is ready. It's good that he has a transparency spell, so it wasn't difficult for him to pass by the police unnoticed. But why did dungeons appear so suddenly? Approaching the door, he noted, strangely, the entrance was exactly the same as in the other world. Descending the stairs, the protagonist remarked he'd seen this dungeon before. Could it be from another world? If so, then he already had experience with them. There should be slimes on the first floor, goblins on the second. Descending further, he confirmed his suspicions were correct. This was definitely a dungeon from another world. He thought he should delve deeper. Having done so, the protagonist found himself lost in thought. Before him, one of the defeated monsters, a huge dragon. Everything was absolutely identical. He wondered if the monsters could be hunted the same way, extracting mana stones and ore from them. There was still hope. If they could hunt the monsters, which would likely reappear again and again, the resource problem could be solved. The fact that military exploration of the dungeons had been unsuccessful suggests that the weapons of this world are ineffective against dungeon monsters. So the only possible path left for them was to follow in the footsteps of the people from another world. In that world, resources could only be obtained in dungeons. Over time, people emerged who hunted monsters to obtain these resources. They were called adventurers. The protagonist hoped that they, too, would find people who would take on this role. MC decided to store the dragon's drop in his inventory, which he did. He thought the king of that world had seen potential in him, a man from another world, so surely there were similar people in his world. After this, the protagonist activated the teleporter and found himself at the exit of the first level of the dungeon. Suddenly, he felt hungry after his journey and decided to buy some food on the way home. The protagonist looked at his palm and chuckled thoughtfully. It said level 1. He thought it was strange that even though all his abilities had transferred with him, it still showed him level 1. This number hadn't existed before he descended into the dungeon. The protagonist tried to activate the effect removal skill on this inscription, but it had no effect. Suddenly, he heard one of the police officers ask his partner if he heard it. His partner replied that he heard nothing, only silence. The protagonist suddenly realized he'd forgotten to use his invisibility ability. Instantly activating it, he realized he'd done it just in time. Police officers appeared near him, and one of them spoke. Or was it his imagination? Finding nothing and no one, the police officers returned to their post. The MC remarked how convenient the invisibility spell was. He heard the police officer say regretfully that, no matter how you look at it, with this kind of thing appearing, resources would only deplete. What would happen to their world? Time to remember God. The protagonist activated the teleporter. It was a rather convenient spell, allowing him to travel between any point he visited. Unless, of course, he was in a dungeon. The protagonist found himself at home. Only then did he realize he'd forgotten to buy himself lunch. He collapsed on his bed, thinking he was too lazy to go outside. After lying there for a while, he heard the doorbell ring. Kayoko came in with a bag and told him her mother had asked her to bring him some beef stew. The girl looked the protagonist up and down, surprised to see he was still wearing his school uniform. After a while, Kayoko set the table for him and announced she'd borrowed their plates. The protagonist, who had changed by then, looked at the dishes and exclaimed that it all looked delicious. Wishing the girl bon appetit, he greedily dug into his meal. Kayoko reminded him to chew everything thoroughly. The main character said her mom cooks better than anyone. The girl asked him how he liked the salad. She made it herself. The MC chuckled and started praising her. Everything tastes perfectly chopped, and this store-bought mayonnaise. She laughed and said, "What kind of comment is that really?" Having eaten his fill, the protagonist thanked her for her concern. Kayoko told him, "Great, now they can play together." They haven't done that in a while. The protagonist was forced to decline her offer. He told her he was busy. Kayoko, surprised, asked him what he was doing. He wasn't the most sociable person after all. The protagonist noticed, exactly, and showing her his palm, he asked her to look at it. The girl looked at his palm, puzzled, and asked him what she was looking at. The MC guessed that it seemed she simply couldn't see it. He asked her permission to look at her hands. The astonished girl agreed and held out her palms to him. The protagonist looked at them carefully, but saw nothing. She cautiously pulled her hands back and said, "Oh, stop doing this." She wanted to know, what's wrong with him? After a while, she got ready to leave. The protagonist thanked her again for everything and asked that she convey his gratitude to her mother. After Kayoko left, he looked thoughtfully at his palm, with the inscription, wondering if the level indicator on his hand was somehow related to dungeons. Was that the adventurer level? If so, it was rather odd that the hero who defeated the Demon King would be given a beginner level. The protagonist lay down on the bed, stretched out on it with pleasure, and noted that there was too little information to give the overall picture. A long stay in the dungeon was so tiring. It was time for him to sleep, and tomorrow he could conquer the second dungeon in Ueno Park. With these thoughts, the protagonist fell into a deep sleep. The next day, a squad of police entered the dungeon. The captain told his subordinates to be on guard. They wouldn't be able to use electricity or gunpowder in the dungeon. Sato wondered, surprised, if he was exaggerating the dungeon or something, but but with so many people, nothing could stop them. At that moment, he heard a sound from above, but it was too late. A slime from the ceiling lowered its slime and enveloped Sato in it. A stir erupted among the police officers. The senior inspector ordered his subordinates not to expose themselves to danger from above. They must surround and attack the slime that had absorbed Sato. With incredible effort, the police slowed the monster and reported this to their superior. The captain replied that this was excellent news. Now, let them destroy the slime's core. The police took aim and pierced the monster's core. The slime deflated and spread across the floor. Everyone rejoiced. They had won. The captain ordered his subordinates to gather all the magic slime and mana stones, and let them not forget about the dropped items. He ordered Kaneko to monitor the perimeter. After some time, the captain asked his team if anyone had been caught. He was informed that policeman Sato had been crushed to death by a slime. They performed a farewell ritual for the brave policeman. The police asked the captain, "Are they moving on?" The senior officer thought, "They only have 17 mana stones." There were 12 people from the self-defense forces and 10 from the fire department. He ordered his men to retreat. Their operation was over. Have them carefully transport Sato's body. After some time, police officers came into the captain's office and reported that they had brought the person he had asked for. One of the officers stood before him, perplexed as to what he had done wrong. The captain asked him, "He says he has a level on his hand. Let him show him his hand." He saw nothing on the policeman's hand. He told the newcomer that from that day on, he was suspended from service. Let him have a consultation, collect his benefits, and take some time off. The policeman looked upset and turned to leave. The captain asked him what he saw on his hand. The young man replied that he saw a level 2. The captain spoke thoughtfully. "Yes, that's it." He looked at his hand and muttered, "As for me, I see a level 3 warrior." Meanwhile, the protagonist met Kayoko again on the way to school. They greeted each other. The girl incidentally remarked about the numbers on his hand. She'd heard that sometimes those who complete a dungeon get them. They display his adventurer level and profession. The protagonist said thoughtfully, "Is that so?" Kayoko continued, "Doesn't he watch TV at all? There are already 20 of them in America. They have the most of them. They have a real pioneering spirit. In their country, 2 police officers, 5 members of the self-defense forces, and 1 firefighter wear the same license plates. Rumor has it that there are many more, but since only the owner can see the symbols, no one can confirm it for sure." The protagonist looked at his hand and thought, "So this really is the adventurer level?" Then there was an error in his level, and his profession wasn't displayed. Kayoko spoke up, admitting that she'd also been staring at her hands for a long time. "It would be great to become an adventurer." The protagonist looked at her in surprise. She continued, "A lot of people admire adventurers these days, and it's a profitable business. Isn't that cool?" MC answered, "Maybe she's right." When the protagonist entered the classroom, his classmates were chattering. He greeted Yamada, who greeted him back. The protagonist asked him what all the fuss was about. Yokoyama stood in the center, and all his classmates admired him. They told him, "Wow, he's a real man. And how many floors has he conquered already?" Yokoyama smugly told them he was on the 4th floor now, and the monsters there were pretty strong. They knew that. They shouldn't make a big deal out of it. He was doing it illegally. One of the boys exclaimed how cool it was, his classmate conquering a dungeon. Yamada told the protagonist that this guy had earned the adventurer's mark. The MC looked at his classmate in surprise. Yamada sadly said he'd like to go into a dungeon himself and test himself, but until he graduated from high school, it was illegal. The protagonist, looking at Yokoyama, said, "Such a law has already been enacted." The students' screams did not stop until the teacher told Yokoyama to go to the principal's office. He'd heard the police had visited them. The boy waved to his classmates and left the classroom. His classmates were saying, "He's so cool. Had he been discovered?" The protagonist wondered what this guy was hiding. As soon as the teacher announced the start of class, the protagonist asked permission to go to the restroom. Entering one of the stalls, MC activated his clairvoyance skill and looked into the principal's office. The principal apologized to Yokoyama for having to drag him out of class. The police captain said they weren't here to arrest him, but to have a little talk. The captain, looking sternly at the boy, said, "People with the mark of an adventurer are starting to appear all over the world, and each one of them is extremely important." The protagonist thought in surprise, "So that's it?" The captain asked Yokoyama if he could show him his level and profession. The guy, without batting an eye, replied that he was level 6, with the profession of thief. The captain said, "If he's not lying, that's simply excellent." Currently, the highest level belonged to a guy from America. He had reached level 6. Yokoyama chuckled. What was he talking about? The protagonist silently told Yokoyama to stop his nonsense. The captain continued, "Since he was level 6, he'd probably encountered something like this before, right?" He showed the guy an object. Yokoyama asked him what it was. The policeman replied, "This thing is known as a scout. It's a rare item found in dungeons." The captain held it to his eye and noted that usually only people can see their own level. But with a scout, you can see someone else's level too. The protagonist was surprised. What was that? He immediately wanted a scout like that too. Meanwhile, the policeman asked Yokoyama to show him his hand. The boy was sweating from the strain. He had nothing else to do. He tearfully apologized to the policeman and declared that he was no adventurer. He had never even set foot in a dungeon. He did it to become popular. This greatly surprised the protagonist. The captain immediately lost interest in the boy. As he left, the captain said, "What a pity. Let him know if he gets a mark after graduation." The protagonist thought perplexedly about Yokoyama. He wondered if he could fool everyone, since only the mark's owner could see it. Did such people really exist? Sometime later, a crowd of people stood at the checkpoint near the dungeon. The guards told them that exploring the dungeons was very dangerous for those who hadn't acquired a mark, so entry was strictly limited. The boss of a guy named Kunimi said, "So that's it." He turned to a colleague and asked him what they would do if they weren't allowed through. The guy assured his boss that everything would be fine. Walking confidently up to the guards, Kunimi showed them a piece of paper and said, "They have all the necessary documents. The state can't accuse them of anything. Exploring dungeons is their civil right. Let them let him and his colleague through." The guard carefully examined the document, returned it to Kunimi, and declared that everything was fine. They could proceed. Upon entering the dungeon, the boss marveled. "This is simply amazing. They've entered here." Kunimi replied, "A lawyer posted a video on his channel about how to get into the dungeon. He watched it and prepared everything in advance." The guy looked at his palm and cursed. No mark had appeared. He asked his boss, "How are things going?" The boss looked at his hand and said he had nothing either. Kunimi smiled and exclaimed, "Don't worry. They could still give it their all. There were supposed to be slimes on the first floor. They could be defeated without any superpowers." The boss asked him doubtfully, "Are you sure they could?" Kunimi replied that they were. He'd watched a bunch of adventure strategy videos. The boss was surprised. People had already started making strategy videos. It was incredible. His subordinate explained that the cameras weren't working in the dungeon, so these videos mostly consisted of conversations and notes from past missions. He unfolded the sheet of paper and thought, puzzled. He'd printed out the map from the video, but it didn't show the passage on the left. The boss, noticing Kunimi's frown, asked him anxiously, "Is something wrong?" The guy smiled and told him that everything was fine and they were moving on. He thought he shouldn't disturb the boss. The video's creator must have simply forgotten about this passage. Suddenly, a slime appeared in front of them. Kunimi warned the boss about it and called him after him, suggesting that he chase the monster into a dead end. The boss ran after his subordinate, but suddenly another slime appeared ahead of them. Kunimi exclaimed in alarm, "Another slime. This wasn't in the guide. There shouldn't be slimes here." Meanwhile, in one of the apartments, a young man sat staring at his monitors. He exclaimed, "Oh my god, how many views have already accumulated?" He couldn't wait to get his money. His girlfriend approached him and asked which video he was talking about. The one with the fake dungeon capturing guide? The guy told her that it was. He added that the views were simply insane. The girl said with a grin, "Who even watches this nonsense? She definitely wouldn't understand them." The boy muttered, "Maybe these are laid-off employees?" He heard a lot of companies had gone bankrupt. Meanwhile, Kunimi exclaimed, "It's not a given they can defeat even one, and here there are two of them at once. They didn't stand a chance." He turned to the boss and told him to draw the monster's attention to himself, and the boss should run away as quickly as possible. The boss called out his subordinate's name in warning, and the boy barely managed to fend off the slime's attack. After the blow, he saw that his weapon was covered in slime. He needed another weapon, but at that moment, Kunimi discovered that his legs were also being enveloped in slime. He screamed in panic, and instantly the slime engulfed him completely. Kunimi despairingly wondered if he was going to die. But at that moment, the boss struck the slime with a stick and yelled at the monster to let Kunimi go. The boy gratefully turned to his boss. The man yelled at him to wait a little while. He would save him. Kunimi tried to stop him, but it was no use. Let him run. He had a wife and daughter. The boss yelled at him. That's why he wouldn't be able to face his family if he abandoned his subordinate. Kunimi wouldn't die. He'd try to get him out at any cost. No one noticed how the slime had reached the boss and instantly enveloped him in its slime. Kunimi anxiously called out to the boss. He thought he'd met him 3 years ago. Kunimi had been wandering from place to place after leaving juvenile detention. His relatives, who owned a small store, told him they'd be happy to help him get back on his feet. A short time later, his uncle asked him if he'd happened to go to the cash register. It turned out they were only good at chatting. His aunt smiled and said, "Please forgive her. She must have miscalculated the take." Uncle remarked, "Well, given his past, their suspicions weren't surprising." And so, Kunimi met the boss. He told him with a smile that he believed everyone deserved a chance to start over. At first, Kunimi didn't believe him. Most likely, he was just pretending to be kind. One day, his boss asked him to move a truck with cargo. Kunimi was stopped by his friends from his past life. They told him that they needed to sell goods from the warehouse on the black market, and Tatsumi would give him the route. Kunimi told the boss to stop dragging him into all this. He told them he was starting a new life. The boss threatened him, then let him give them the contents of the truck. Kunimi took out his phone and told him he refused. He told them he had a new life, and if they continued to bother him, he would call the police on them. The thugs pounced on him, shouting, "Who is he even talking about? They started beating him. One of the thugs asked the boss what they should do with the truck. Kunimi yelled at them to stay away from him. The bandits laughed and set fire to the boss's truck. Sometime later, Kunimi in the hospital thought this was the end. He hadn't lived up to his boss's expectations. At that moment, the door to the hospital room swung open, and the boss himself walked in. He turned to his subordinate and asked how his injuries were. Kunimi, in a downcast voice, apologized and added that his truck, loaded with goods, had been destroyed. The boss told him everything was fine and not to worry. Everything was insured, and he had savings for such emergencies. So next time, he shouldn't try to put out the fire himself. Kunimi looked at his boss in amazement and thought, he's a good man. The boss, with tears in his eyes, told him that he could buy a new truck, but no one would replace him. He should try to take better care of himself. And now Kunimi, himself in the slime, looked at his boss, who was also being absorbed by the slime, and thought it was all his fault because he believed that fake video. He closed his eyes and prayed, "Oh God, if you exist," he's begging him, please let him at least spare his boss's life. At that moment, something happened that confused Kunimi. The slime suddenly burst, freeing the boss and himself from the slime. The protagonist appeared before Kunimi's eyes. He adjusted his mask and declared that he had made it just in time. They both leaned over the boss. Kunimi gratefully told the protagonist that he had saved him. What about the boss? MC, activating his skill, told him that he would use healing magic and that he should make sure the boss didn't move. The protagonist added that they both could still be helped, so he shouldn't worry. Finally, the protagonist said, "Great, the boss is fine." Kunimi looked at the protagonist in surprise and thanked him for his help. He added that if MC hadn't come, they would have simply been killed. Kunimi thought his prayers had been answered. Ryoji told him there was no need to thank him. He was just passing by. Kunimi asked him his name. He wanted to thank him properly. The protagonist said he preferred to remain anonymous. He added, by the way, that if they didn't change their equipment, they would die in obscurity. The protagonist said this floor belonged to slimes. If they planned to hunt them, they'd better catch them one by one in a space about 30 meters wide. And if they attacked, one of them should be the target, and the other should hit the monster, then take turns. Then the protagonist said he needed to go, because he still needed to find a scout. He left, and Kunimi, watching him go, thought in surprise, hunt, target, even the police and self-defense forces suffer a ton of casualties, and this guy took out slimes with a single blow. Who the hell is he? After some time, the protagonist's dream came true. He found the very item called the Scout. It was a rare drop from monsters, and it allowed him to see another person's level and profession. The government of the protagonist's country bought all the found copies from adventurers at an exorbitant price, but the protagonist found it himself. He tried on the item, and it made a beeping sound. The protagonist was surprised. Only 3 combat damage? It was just trash, but it looked good. At that moment, the doorbell rang. The protagonist shouted for them to come in, and Kayoko appeared on the threshold. The girl told him she had come to study with him. Seeing the amazing object on Ryoji's eye, she exclaimed in surprise, "Is this a scout?" But the protagonist had forgotten to take it off, and now looked embarrassed. Kayoko remarked, "It's a nice model. Where did he get it?" She's currently making costume number 29. It would go perfectly with the cosplay. The protagonist objected, saying it wouldn't suit her design. Kayoko insisted, waving her hand and saying, "No problem, this one will suit her." So where did he find it? The protagonist stared at her palm in surprise. The girl had a level 1 mark. She asked him, surprised, what's wrong with him? The MC wondered, she has an adventurer's mark? She hadn't entered the dungeon, and yet he could still see it? People with this mark have every chance of becoming adventurers. But if a newbie goes into a dungeon without an experienced guide, in another world, he has seen too often how this ends. Kayoko didn't understand what was happening to him. She called out to him again, and finally, she pulled him out of his thoughts. He told her she wouldn't buy it. It was a rare lottery prize. The girl said, "Upset, that's it." She added that she was very envious of him. The protagonist looked at his hand and thought, there was no point in dwelling on it now. He'd deal with problems as they came. His profession wasn't showing up. It was probably some kind of glitch. Besides, his level itself was strange. Kayoko remarked, "Well, they need to do their homework, so she'll go in to see him." After a while, Kayoko said that his knowledge had improved significantly over the holidays. He'd even taken first place on his exams. How did he do that? The protagonist was confused by her question, so he told her the first thing that came to mind. He told her it was probably because he was just reading textbooks in his spare time. She asked him with a smile, "Are you sure he's telling the truth? Maybe he was cheating?" The protagonist didn't know what to say, but he decided he needed to tell her the truth. So MC said the truth is he'd ended up in another world where he'd honed his skills. He exhaled. Great, he'd told her the truth. Kayoko looked at him in confusion and asked hesitantly, "Is he serious?" Ryoji stared at her silently. She asked him in surprise, "Where is this other world?" The protagonist exclaimed in confusion. "What?" The girl told him she wanted to go there too. "Is it somewhere near the station?" After she'd completed the winter training, it had gotten easier for her too. The protagonist thought with embarrassment, the other world isn't like a preparatory course for her. He remembered his training with Daenerys. When he defeated a monster yet again, he'd exclaimed, "He did it! The monster might be physically strong, but it simply doesn't stand a chance against magic." Daenerys told him, He knows the copper turtle will continue to regenerate until he destroys its core, right? The protagonist asked her in surprise, where is its core? The princess replied that it's under its shell. As the protagonist began to reach the monster's core, the girl impatiently asked, would you mind speeding up already? Otherwise, the copper turtle would rise again. Ryoji replied, it's not as easy as it looks. One blade won't be enough. Daenerys added, come to think of it, this isn't the kind of monster a beginner can handle alone. Then she asked him ironically, should I help him? The protagonist looked at her and replied that it wasn't necessary. He could handle it himself. He even felt a little offended. At that moment, the monster jumped up and let out a deafening roar. MC nearly fell over in surprise. He had to activate his thunder skill to deal with the enemy again. After he killed the turtle and began to quickly obtain its core, the princess remarked that they were probably going to be here for a while. While the protagonist dealt with the enemy, Daenerys activated the tea table and sat down to drink tea. After a short while, the protagonist exclaimed, finally, the copper turtle is finished. He reached the core and destroyed it. Ryoji straightened up and thought, that feeling again. His body felt lighter. His vision improved. The princess remarked, excellent work. As she could see, he'd leveled up. Now he could take a break. When the protagonist turned to her, he asked in surprise, where did the tea set come from in the dungeon? Daenerys replied that she'd brought it from her storage. She added that he should sit down and have some tea while she stored the materials and the copper turtle's loot in the storage. He told her he wanted the same skill. The protagonist continued, saying that, by the way, he hadn't seen his level displayed anywhere. Was there any way he could find it out? The princess replied that he could. After all, his level had just increased when he killed the copper turtle. The protagonist wondered if that feeling of lightness was actually leveling up. He asked her to tell him more about it. Daenerys looked puzzled. Hadn't she told him that? Ryoji said sadly, if only he remembered how many times he'd already leveled up. The princess remarked, don't be afraid, she remembers everything. The girl added, perhaps he should try some baked goods in the meantime? The protagonist asked her if she really remembered everything. Daenerys had told him that leveling up also increased his intelligence and all other stats. She only had to see something once, and she'd remember it in detail. MC asked her in surprise, so the more monsters he killed, the stronger he became. The princess noted, in general terms, yes. He thought, biting into the baked goods. If his skills carried over to the other world, then after killing the Demon King, he could become the smartest in his homeland. The princess asked him how it tasted. She was afraid he might not like it. Suddenly, another copper turtle interrupted their conversation. Daenerys exclaimed, how resilient. She continued, but the protagonist didn't hear her. He rushed forward to attack the monster. In a matter of seconds, he dispatched the enemy, slicing it in half and destroying the core. When it was all over, the protagonist didn't expect to destroy it so quickly. He wondered, surprised, what? He thought this monster would be just as difficult as the first one. But now he understood. It seemed to be the level up. All his stats had improved. MC looked at the princess. She stood with her head down, looking at the crumbled cookies. She said sadly, baked goods. He wondered if these were her favorite sweets, and that's why she was so upset. The protagonist began to review his victories. First, he killed 3 slimes, then the goblins from the second floor. Amazing, he actually managed to remember. However, increasing intelligence paired with leveling up was a bit much. He thought, at this point, he'd leveled up to 73. Perhaps now he could remember all his favorite anime lines. When he defeated the Demon King, his level was over 1400. Sometime later, during the 3rd general exam after the protagonist returned from another world, the teacher told them it was time to begin their exam. He warned his students not to cheat. The entire class sat quietly, completely silent. The protagonist looked at the test paper and happily thought he knew the answers to all the problems, and all it took was just reading the textbook once. All that work in that world wasn't in vain. Thank Daenerys, he didn't let her down. After some time, the teacher announced the exam results and announced that the protagonist had won first place, scoring 496 points in 5 subjects. The protagonist rejoiced at his grade. The teacher told him they needed to talk about his future. He should stop by the staff room after class. MC was surprised to hear this. During recess, his classmates congratulated him on his high grade. They still couldn't believe he had such knowledge. Yamada confided in him that he was amazed by his knowledge. Would he tell them what the magic was? The protagonist apologized to everyone and told them he had to go. The teacher had called him and he shouldn't linger. When the protagonist approached the staff room, the teacher remarked, how has he grown so quickly? If he wants to go to that college, then it's time for him to decide on a high school. The other teachers were murmuring among themselves. Is that kid Ryoji's best student? The protagonist told the teacher he'd think about it. He thought he was in trouble. Standing out from the crowd was too much of a hassle. Leaving the teacher's office, the protagonist thought this was child's play for him, but he'd better try to maintain an average level of knowledge. He wouldn't be able to dive into the dungeon with that kind of attention. Walking down the hallway, lost in his thoughts, MC didn't hear the other students asking each other, is that the guy who took first place, second year, Ryoji? The protagonist continued his thoughts. He'd risked his life to defeat the Demon King, and he wasn't about to miss his chance at a peaceful life. And now, in the present, the protagonist told Kayoko, but that's the story. The girl said, well, that's not all. Maybe then he'd come up with another story about how she was reincarnated as a villain. MC looked at her in surprise. Did he even need to ask her to trust him? A little later, while doing her homework, she noticed she couldn't solve one problem. The protagonist, glancing at her difficulty, told the girl that she needed to use this equation. Kayoko exclaimed, "He really is a real hero from another world. So smart." After class, they decided to grab a snack. The protagonist remarked, "After class, your brain just craves something sweet, doesn't it?" Kayoko agreed and asked him if he wanted to go with her to have her level assessed. He seemed interested. "Level assessed?" the girl remarked. Had he heard about a high school for adventurers being built in the city center? Only those with the adventurer's mark were accepted there. Therefore, representatives of the Ministry of Culture decided to conduct an assessment of the third-year high school students using a scout. Naturally, theirs is a real one, unlike his. The protagonist said thoughtfully, "I see." She asked him if he wanted to know if he had the adventurer's mark. Let him even remember his story from another world. MC told her, to the girl's surprise, that he didn't want to find out. He thought that he already knew he had one. Kayoko's expression sank. Wasn't he the least bit interested? Ryoji told her, not at all. He was too lazy to go there. She looked at him with distrust and said, "Really?" After a moment's hesitation, Kayoko admitted that she felt a bit awkward going alone. The protagonist thought, there it is, that sly look of hers. She'd been using that trick since she was a baby. The girl had asked him point blank if he would go with her. How could he refuse someone he'd been friends with since childhood? Of course, the protagonist had agreed. The girl's joy knew no bounds. She exclaimed, "Now he's a real hero." When Kayoko went home, the protagonist remembered Daenerys. Returning from another expedition, he asked her if she didn't think not being able to see her level was the most inconvenient thing. The princess told him she'd never thought about it. It might be more convenient, but it would also cause problems. She continued, she'd heard rumors that some nobles who claimed to have a high level were actually just making it up. If everyone could see their level, they wouldn't be able to pretend anymore, right? She felt like that would lead to quite a brawl. Ryoji asked her in surprise why anyone would lie about their level. She said he was stupid. People liked to look down on those below them. Even he would do that when he surpassed her in level. The protagonist exclaimed indignantly, "Why all of a sudden?" He wasn't going to do that. Daenerys pointed out that everyone said that. The protagonist countered, "They summoned him into this world using enough energy to power the country for 50 years, right?" The princess looked at him in surprise, forced to admit it. He continued, "Even though she said he was the savior of this world, it was usually she who saved him from trouble. Besides, she had managed to cast an extremely complex spell, knowing there would be no second attempt. He admired her too much to look down on her." The princess looked at him with interest. The main character said, and the summoned hero turned out to be a frail schoolboy who needs to be accompanied everywhere so that he doesn't die. He had certainly become stronger, but she was constantly coddling him and couldn't spare a moment for herself. The protagonist added that if he were asked to do the same, he wouldn't be able to. He looked at her and declared that she is amazing. Therefore, even if he were level 1000, he would never be able to look down on her. Daenerys, looking at him with tears in her eyes, couldn't hold back and burst into tears. He was frightened. Had he offended her somehow? The girl asked him to simply shut up. At the princess's request, they temporarily stopped exploring the dungeon that day. In this world, a person can see their level and profession. Discrimination could arise based on this. Less popular and low-level professions would have a hard time. But he was a hero, so his level had exceeded 1400, so it didn't concern him. He looked at his palm, where the level 1 mark was, and thought he had a bad feeling about this. At City Hall, government officials were gathered for a meeting. One of the officials approached Chairman Takahashi and said that, according to their information, dungeon exploration was underway in all countries, including the United States. The chairman replied that when the existing resources were completely depleted, they would have to mine new ones from the dungeons. The official remarked that for the sake of their country, they needed to send as many adventurers there as quickly as possible. The chairman agreed. He remarked that, fortunately, a large number of dungeons had appeared in their country. Furthermore, the percentage of adventurers among their citizens was extremely high, a whopping 2%. The global average was only 0.5%. They had already sharply raised the prices of all items found in the dungeons. Did they have any other suggestions? The official remarked that they should expand their search for adventurers, especially among the youth. The Minister of Education said they had introduced a law allowing high school students to visit dungeons. They also planned to conduct a placement test for middle school graduates. The chairman asked his subordinates about permission to build a school for adventurers. He thought it could determine the future of their country. After a while, a large crowd of students gathered outside the building where the placement test was being held. The protagonist, arriving here with Kayoko, was surprised to see so many people here. It was simply astonishing. The girl told him there were tons of people from their school, all wanting to become adventurers. The protagonist countered that they were just looking to make money. Kayoko told him he was right. They said even if someone simply hunted slimes from the first floor, they could earn several times more in a month than an average office worker. A student from their school caught their attention. The boy exclaimed indignantly, "This is ridiculous. Let them check him again. He'll see the results himself." The inspector told him it wouldn't work. This was expensive equipment. If he broke it, he'd have to pay over 100 million yen. The protagonist remarked in surprise, taking this too seriously. Kayoko remarked that she understood his feelings, but this was going too far. Ryoji's sensitive hearing allowed him to hear the inspector quietly mutter about how difficult it was to deal with children. So many problematic moments. He was already itching to get home. The protagonist thought the inspector was at his wit's end. Kayoko was next on the list. A few minutes later, the inspector told her that, according to the scout, she was a level 1 warrior. Kayoko exclaimed delightedly, "How wonderful." Her classmates recognized her and asked each other in bewilderment, "Seriously, she's that level?" The protagonist, listening to their discussion, thought that it seemed the adventurer's mark wasn't that common. The inspector advised Kayoko to apply to an adventurer's academy. The girl happily assured him that she would do so. The protagonist was next on the list. Ryoji approached the inspector and showed his palm, confident of his success. The inspector looked at his hand through the scout very carefully and perplexedly. MC thought that after all, he wasn't the only one who couldn't see his profession. The inspector regretfully said that he didn't have a mark. At first, the protagonist didn't understand what the inspector was saying. Then he exclaimed in bewilderment, "How could this be?" He was asking the inspector to take another closer look. Kayoko approached him and told him to calm down. She understood he was upset, but he shouldn't embarrass himself. The protagonist exclaimed indignantly, "That's not the point. He definitely has an adventurer's mark." The inspector's assistant turned to him, surprised, and said, "This child definitely has a first-level adventurer's mark." The inspector gritted his teeth and told her not to blab. He didn't have a profession. It would be better if he forgot about becoming an adventurer. The protagonist asked him what he meant. The inspector thought irritably, "Another problem." Out loud, he answered the protagonist, "Is that what he really wants to know?" To conquer dungeons, people form parties of several people. If you go there alone, you can die even on the first floor. In a party, the balance is between attackers and those defending from the rear. A person's profession determines their special skills, spells, and bonus status points. Without a profession, their contribution to the party will be 0. To put it bluntly, they'll become dead weight for the group. The protagonist replied that his profession wasn't displayed only due to a random error. He really did have one. He could feel it. He had enough strength to venture into the dungeon even alone. The inspector was already struggling to contain his emotions. He exclaimed in irritation, "Enough! He's just a kid who's never even been there. No one would know it from looking at him, but he's a 6th-level mage who's been to the 5th floor. Does he understand that?" He couldn't understand how dangerous the dungeon can be. The protagonist chuckled to himself at his words, and he says this to the hero who's been to the 999th floor. The classmates anxiously tried to figure out what was going on between the inspector and the protagonist. Kayoko told him he was overreacting. He sheepishly remarked, "Really? He hadn't meant to push it that far." He bowed politely to the inspector, apologizing for arguing with him, even though he had never been in the dungeon before. He couldn't even imagine that he, the inspector, was fighting mad bees on the 5th floor. Kayoko called the protagonist to come with her. The inspector looked at the protagonist in surprise. Why had he even mentioned mad bees? Information about the 5th floor was still strictly classified. On the way home, Kayoko told him that he, surprisingly, had been so persistent. The protagonist replied that it was his fault. The girl remarked, but she was glad they both had the adventurer's mark. They should apply to that school together. The protagonist wasn't against it. At that moment, Kay called out to Kayoko. The girl recognized the guy as someone she knew and greeted him. MC was surprised, wondering who it was. Her classmate? Kay told Kayoko that they'd found his mark. He was a level 1 hunter. The girl exclaimed, "That's great." The protagonist, looking at them, thought with a smile, "They both look so happy. It's a joy to behold." Kay told her there would be a career training session nearby. Would she like to join? Kayoko said hesitantly, "I don't even know if I'll go." The guy was persistent. She had to listen to him. She should go. The girl finally decided to do it. She said goodbye to the protagonist and told him they'd see each other again. On the way, Kay told her what a relief it was that someone he knew also had the adventurer's mark. Kayoko told him that she understood him. The protagonist looked confused and watched them for a long moment. Meanwhile, in Great Britain, in Crinwich County, Countess Isabella Lune Crinwich, a holy knight, addressed her adventurers and announced that it was becoming increasingly difficult for them to level up on the 4th floor. Today, they would descend to the 5th floor. She added that it was a dangerous dungeon, so she asked them to remain vigilant. Her team reported that she could count on them. She smiled and exclaimed, "Then, they're off to the dungeon." The countess looked at her palm, which bore the mark Level 9 Holy Knight, and thought that in most cases, the offensive type profession was either warriors or martial artists. She had never heard of anyone else holding the Holy Knight title. In games, it's something like a high-class profession, but she'd only just noticed that her stats were growing faster than those of warriors and martial artists. The girl and her team arrived at the 1st floor of a dungeon in Crinwich County. They were greeted by a multitude of slimes. Mustache said, "Slimes. Lately, they even look cute." The saint told everyone not to relax. Azumi replied that she understood. Beard remarked, "They wiped them all out yesterday, didn't they? It was all strange. Isabella told them to focus. They're moving forward and attacking. The rest of you should cover the rear and keep an eye on the situation. At that moment, a slime attacked Beard and wounded him. The saint immediately activated her healing skill and healed Beard's wounds. He thanked her for saving him. Azumi, meanwhile, activated a fireball and attacked the monsters. Mustache exclaimed, "I wonder where they come from." Isabella called out anxiously, seeing a slime approaching him from behind. She lunged at the monster and destroyed it. Mustache thanked her for her help in a stuttering voice. The saint remarked admiringly, "The Countess is so beautiful." Isabella remarked, "The monsters are most likely stuck in a time paradox, but given all their resources and experience, it's actually beneficial for them." The saint added, "And the location change. A real game." Mustache replied, "Professions, levels, and skill upgrades." Isabella agreed with her allies, adding that they were being careful. Unlike in the game, they could actually suffer here. The Countess declared that as soon as everyone was ready, they would begin their descent to the second floor. The saint spoke up, detesting goblins. Azumi remarked that they were always stalking female adventurers. At that very moment, one of the goblins placed its paw on her shoulder. The girl, unfazed, fought back, activating a fireball. The goblin was quickly destroyed. Isabella admiringly told her, "Amazing. She managed to defeat a goblin single-handedly. Her diligence in leveling up had not been in vain." The Countess added, "They have MP potions. Don't forget to use them." Azumi sheepishly replied that she understood. These potions were so expensive, and yet the Countess generously gave them to her adventurers. She was very grateful for everything. The saint spoke in bewilderment. And yet, in books, goblins are so small, but in reality, they're almost the size of a human. She doesn't even want to go near them. Isabella smiled and told her allies, "Okay, she'll clear a path for them straight to the second floor exit." The Countess charged at the crowd of monsters. Mustache exclaimed, "This is bad. They've banded together." Azumi asked in confusion, "Is it because of the noise from her magic?" Beard shouted to his allies, "They can't let the enemy surround them. They need to protect the Countess." While they were saying all this, the Countess had easily dispatched an entire horde of goblins. The adventurers were shocked. Azumi chuckled and said, "Shouldn't they be protecting the Countess, not the other way around?" Beard just swallowed loudly and Mustache said, "Isabella is strong." He didn't even have time to blink. The saint spoke. "At least she can help the Countess. Even her reserves of physical strength are limited. She needs healing." Mustache cursed and exclaimed indignantly, "They can be useful too." Beard called on everyone to help the Countess. After some time, the allies caught their breath after a difficult battle. The saint spoke, "So, now it's time for her healing magic." At that moment, Isabella stepped forward and also activated healing, directing it at Beard. He thanked the Countess for her concern. Mustache also asked her to use this skill on him. The saint asked in surprise, "What is this?" The Countess answered her. With her level up, she had gained the healing skill, and now she will assist her with healing. The saint laughed in bewilderment, while Azumi said, "Let her forget about it." Returning to the mansion, Isabella thanked her allies for all their efforts. They did well today. Having unloaded all the spoils from their raid, the Countess announced that this was the fruit of their expedition today. It contained magic and iron ore, loot, and even monster materials. The allies were amazed. So much stuff. The Countess's vault has incredible capacity. Isabella said she thought the government would buy it all for around 100,000 pounds sterling. It was a shame they hadn't found a scout. Then the sum would have risen to 1 million. After the sale and expenses, the remaining sum would be divided among all the party members. The allies joyfully thanked the Countess for this. Suddenly, Duke Grosvenor told them to wait. He turned to Isabella and asked if she had forgotten anything. Viscount Wyatt asked her why she was wearing such shameless gear. Isabella sarcastically asked them if they had decided to honor them with their attention. The Duke stated that House Crinwich was the sole owner of the dungeon, but this was only with the permission of House Grosvenor, the original owner. The Viscount added that in such gear she was only a disgrace to the family's honor, but he would have liked to have taken a closer look. The Countess replied that she understood everything, so what did they want? The Duke, with a nasty grin, replied, 50%. Isabella, taken aback, couldn't immediately find a reply. The Duke continued that if they gave him 50% of what they found in the dungeon, he would turn a blind eye to everything. Azumi exclaimed in bewilderment, "Half?" Isabella replied that she was willing to give him her own share, but he couldn't expect more. Each member of the party had risked their lives. They couldn't reduce their reward. Exhaling, she thought she'd managed to tell him that. She continued, "He knows the death toll in the dungeon has already surpassed 100,000? It's such a dangerous place that even she can't manage it on her own. She's already negotiating with the government about handing over control of the dungeon." The Duke exclaimed indignantly, "Doesn't she understand that a dungeon is a goose that lays golden eggs? She shouldn't dare hand it over to the state. She said it was dangerous? Then what good are their adventurer's marks? Let them level up and continue conquering the dungeon." The Viscount still couldn't shake the idea of getting to know the Countess's outfit better. Isabella firmly said, "But leveling up alone doesn't solve everything. Only if one's level is high enough to reach the very bottom of the dungeon alone." The Duke asked, puzzled, "The very bottom?" If he wasn't mistaken, the world record was currently the 8th floor, right? And there wasn't a single idiot in the world who would climb into a dungeon alone. She shouldn't be making up examples out of thin air. He thought the Countess was level 9, and her intellect had improved significantly. Perhaps she could see further than all of them. So how sensible was it to create a private company to manage the dungeon and wrest the monopoly from the state? He walked on, noting as he went that they were done for the day. Let her not forget to add his tip of £50,000. The Viscount turned to his grandfather in bewilderment. What about the clothing inspection? He had promised him that. The Countess looked after him with a detached expression. The allies looked at their leader with concern. Isabella, with tears in her eyes, thought, so, as long as she remains in England, she will be forever a prisoner in the cage created by the Duke. Meanwhile, in Japan, Tokyo, the protagonist, sneezing incessantly, wondered what was going on. He was sneezing non-stop. Had he caught a cold from the air conditioning? He hadn't gotten sick since leveling up. Perhaps he'd relaxed too much? Just in case, the protagonist used a buff skill on himself and then a healing skill. Feeling perfectly fine, he declared that he was now completely cured. After getting dressed, he went outside. Approaching his destination, he noticed that the Ueno Park dungeon was the place to clear out. He used invisibility and teleportation and then stealth. He had no other choice, as the free passage to the dungeon was blocked, and it wouldn't do him any good to be seen. Having entered the dungeon, the protagonist rushed to the 999th floor. He thought about it. He'd thoroughly checked every floor to make sure, but it seemed this really was the Demon King's dungeon. In another world, this was the deepest and most dangerous dungeon. The next floor would be the 1000th. In another world, the Demon King himself lived there. The protagonist remembered how he'd met him, and now, descending the stairs, he wondered, what's going on here? He'd only fought him once, but his detection skill told him perfectly well that whoever was down there was definitely not the Demon King. When the monster appeared before him, MC was surprised to think it was a dragon of pitch darkness. It was simply enormous. The protagonist had never seen one. Was he the boss of this dungeon? The protagonist knew he was also called the Godslayer. Ryoji drew his sword and thought, so, which is stronger, the Dragon of Darkness or his favorite sword? He activated his acceleration and rushed at the enemy with an attack. The dragon dodged his blow, and the protagonist thought that its speed did not match its incredible size. He still managed to cut off his opponent's tail. The protagonist thought, the enemy has tough scales too. It's a good thing he brought the sword he used to kill the Demon King. The monster looked at MC with amazement in its small eyes. Ryoji wondered in surprise if he'd just now noticed he'd cut off its tail. The dragon let out a chilling roar, released flames from its mouth, and soared upward. The protagonist immediately realized that with the tail, he'd lost weight, and now he couldn't properly balance in flight. Now, aerial combat was a thing of the past. The dragon launched fireballs at him, but the protagonist used ice arrows and repelled the opponent's attack. Ryoji thought that if they were to compare purely on firepower, the dragon would be more powerful than the Demon King. Suddenly, a huge fireball flew out from somewhere, and MC was surprised to notice that the monster had attacked him from a blind spot. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to dodge this unexpected attack. The protagonist fell, thinking the enemy had hit him after all. The monster began to balance directly above the protagonist and, using some kind of spell in its tongue, activated a simply enormous fireball. The protagonist jumped up and exclaimed in surprise, "A meteorite?" Then something happened that the enemy couldn't understand. His own fireball returned and pierced his jaw. MC exclaimed, he'd fallen for his trick after all. He had plenty of his own tricks. He thought he'd have a little more fun, but it would do. It was good that he could nullify meteorites. That was what saved him. The monster was finished. Suddenly, the protagonist felt a slight vibration in his hand and thought it was his level rising. He counted down and said, so, he'd leveled up another 12 levels. He expected no less from a dungeon boss. He looked at his palm and sadly noted that the level marker remained the same. The protagonist approached the fallen enemy and noted that the dark dragon's body was enormous, and it would drop a ton of amazing items. But Ryojiji couldn't take that much home at once, and if he left it there for 24 hours, the dungeon would swallow it all up. A colossal loss. He began examining the enemy's body. More importantly, it had to be here somewhere. Finally, he exclaimed that he had found the dungeon core. He picked it up. It shone with a radiant black light. The protagonist knew that with a dungeon core, one could freely navigate all its floors. It was an extremely useful item if one needed to gather certain materials or level up. He raised his hand with the core and joyfully exclaimed. He still had the core from the king's dungeon, which had been in another world, but in this dungeon, it was completely useless. It was so inconvenient. With this, he would progress faster. Perhaps other dungeons had also formed new cores. How complicated everything was. His main concern now was the loot and materials from the Black Dragon. He'd worry about how to spend them later. He decided to take as much as he could. He knew he wouldn't be able to carry everything. His storage was already cluttered. After a while, the protagonist realized with surprise that he'd managed to fit everything in at once, and come to think of it, he'd never filled it to the brim. He thought he'd proven himself. It was time to put his plan into action, all for the sake of world peace, where he could watch his favorite anime whenever he wanted. Activating the teleporter, MC returned home. Collapsing tiredly onto his bed, he decided that he had to put this plan into action before Kyoko became an adventurer. With these thoughts in mind, he fell asleep. The computer screen glowed on his desk, illuminating the various components lying next to the keyboard. The next day, on the way to school, the protagonist met Kyoko again. They greeted each other. The girl told him they'd confirmed that 100 dungeons had already been discovered in their country. Had he been watching TV? Instead of answering, the protagonist asked her what kind of hairstyle she had. She smiled and asked him, what about her hair? Kei said it made her look cuter. The protagonist, surprised, asked her again. Kyoko changed the subject and noted, by the way, that these were just rumors. But rumors had it that the local dungeon had become overrun with monsters and they had come out. The government quickly mobilized the self-defense forces and they cleared the dungeon in no time. But there were quite a few casualties, both among the military and civilians. He wondered if this was true. The protagonist answered that it was obviously a lie. If this were true, the city would be like a beehive of chaos. The girl said, he's right, but wouldn't it be too dangerous to live if monsters started breeding outside the dungeons? Humanity could end after that. She continued, maybe one of the ancient civilizations was also destroyed after the dungeons appeared and the monsters that emerged from them. The protagonist, surprised, asked her where she got this information. She told him it was written in the Mumu Monthly. He remarked skeptically, really? That's not the most reliable source of information. At that moment, Kei called out to her and they greeted each other. She asked the guy if he had really been waiting for her. The protagonist looked at them, confused. Kei remarked, her hair was so cute. Kyoko sheepishly thanked him for the compliment. They were about to leave. Kyoko waved to the protagonist and told him they'd see each other again. The MC, looking at them, wondered, confused, what was this mixed feeling he was having? Maybe he's in love with Kyoko? No, that can't be right. He looked at them carefully, at the way the girl stared wide-eyed at Kei, hanging on his every word. The protagonist didn't know what it was exactly. Maybe this is how fathers feel when their daughters meet their boyfriends? Suddenly, he realized Kyoko was like family to him, and that's why he was worried about her. Now, understanding the reason, he felt much better. At school, during recess, Amada asked him if he'd been watching the news. Another victim of the false information about dungeon takeover tactics had shown up. The protagonist asked him, is this serious? There had been more and more of them lately. Amada said the victim was lucky to have escaped the dungeon alive and filed a police report, but he believed the death toll from this was much higher. The MC wondered why they were even falling for these false strategies. Amada told him it was a mystery. They say only the most naive fall for this scam. He added, by the way, that Kyoko and Kei had adventurer's marks found. Perhaps they, too, would want to explore dungeons using the strategies in the videos. If so, that would be the end of them. MC, sweating from the tension, asked him again, Kyoko? That can't be. After that, the protagonist told Amada he was going to the restroom for a bit and hurried out of the classroom. Amada followed him and said that he understood. He would tell the teacher, and Ryoji can take his time. Once alone, the protagonist began to think. He, too, had been curious about these videos, so he'd watched them. But none of them had a shred of truth. He couldn't understand why the people who uploaded them would lie like that. He wouldn't say they had any particular motivation, but in any case, something had to be done about it. The protagonist activated the storage and pulled out a copy of himself. Looking at himself with satisfaction, MC said that even though they were one and the same, he was glad he was okay. He thought the dummy was a tool that absorbed enemy attacks. Naturally, it resembled him, the protagonist, so they were practically indistinguishable. It was a consumable item that lasted only one day, and it required a lot of resources, so in the other world, he didn't use it often. Yesterday, he made it for the first time in a long time. With such a resemblance, no one would notice if he started going to class in his stead, in theory. The protagonist turned to his copy and told it, well, he was counting on it. He would return at the end of classes and pick it up. The protagonist activated the teleporter and found himself home. He sat down at the computer, booked a ticket, chose a seat, and paid for it online. Then, MC approached the portraits of his parents. He mentally addressed them and apologized for having to use their money for more than just basic living expenses. After checking himself to make sure he had everything he needed, he decided he was ready to go. The protagonist was about to use the teleporter, but remembered just in time that he had almost forgotten one important thing. A short time later, he teleported to Haneda Airport. The protagonist deactivated his invisibility, looked at the ticket counters, and remembered how he had seen his father off at this airport. The man standing next to him was very surprised by the protagonist's appearance. It seemed to him that no one else was there. Ryoji turned away from the man and thought that teleportation and invisibility were indeed very convenient skills. Approaching the security counter, MC felt his heartbeat faster. This was his first flight, his first security check. As he walked through the terminal, he wondered what the staff would do if the terminal dinged. Walking to the check-in counter, the protagonist thought he should have used the money his uncles had stolen. After all, he wasn't a champion of justice. When Ryoji finally boarded the plane, he found his seat and settled comfortably into it, preparing for the flight. During the flight, the protagonist looked out the window and thought, Flying without magic is simply amazing. After landing, the protagonist took a bus to Katsurahama. Arriving on the shore, he exclaimed, "Excellent. Now he could get here via teleportation." When the MC approached the dungeon, he saw a huge crowd at the entrance. The adventurers were all whispering about the upcoming expedition, and there was a commotion in places. He activated invisibility and entered the dungeon. He didn't expect there to be so many people here. Descending, the protagonist saw a group of adventurers consisting of a girl and 2 boys. One of them suggested that his allies go down to the 2nd floor today. He was already tired of the slimes. The girl countered, "Well, actually, they're just scouting." He told her it was fine. He'd been researching strategy games online. The other guy quipped, "Is this what you call normal?" The protagonist wondered, "So, this guy's one of those people who believes things like that?" Descending, Ryoji glanced around, satisfied with the results. There was no one nearby. He activated detection and thought, as expected, this dungeon also matched the one he'd encountered in the other world. He turned to his storage and pulled out a homemade golem drone, complete with a highly sensitive camera. Electronics weren't allowed in the dungeon, so he'd modified the camera with magic. The basic magical engineering training Daenerys had given him as part of his hero training had proven useful. He figured that if he could easily modify them, he could launch mass production, but they required rare metals and ingredients, so he'd only made 4 so far. The protagonist activated all 4 golem drones and decided it would be problematic if other adventurers saw them. So, he had to use the invisibility skill on them. Of course, this ability burned up his MP, but when the level is above 1,400 points, this cost is practically unnoticeable. MC thought for a moment and decided to start filming from the point where he'd descended into the dungeon. But then he suddenly remembered that he'd almost forgotten the most important thing again. Meanwhile, in class, Amada turned to the golem replica of the protagonist and remarked that he seemed a bit different today. The golem asked him in surprise, "Is that so?" Amada remarked that he seemed slightly different from his usual self. The protagonist's golem chuckled and said that it was a dummy created using high-level magical engineering. Amada smiled and said that he recognized his old friend now. What a relief. Meanwhile, the MC arrived at the 1st floor entrance, donned a special helmet that completely covered his head, and double-checked that his drones were in stealth mode. The protagonist connected the camera, cleared his throat, and greeted his viewers through the camera. He told them that the Dungeon Exploration channel was with them. The protagonist felt like he'd gotten it all wrong, so he decided to start over. He greeted his viewers again and informed them that the Dungeon Exploration channel was with them. Today, they would map the 1st and 2nd floors of the Katsurahama dungeon. He was extremely nervous. Fighting the Demon King was even less nerve-wracking. The MC added that in the next video, they'd develop anti-monster tactics, and they could figure out how to fight different types of monsters together. Ryoji thought excitedly. The more he tried to control himself, the more he stuttered. What was going on? An hour after filming, the protagonist said he'd leave a link to the preview file below the video, and he'd add similar notes in future videos, so please remember to check the description. Turning off the camera, the protagonist breathed a sigh of relief. He was finally done. It took him about 30 takes just for the opening sequence. Suddenly, the same group he'd met at the entrance appeared nearby. The girl asked her allies what was going on. The guy asked her to be quiet and advised his partners to keep their eyes open. The MC, meanwhile, reconnected the webcam and, walking around the floor, announced that they were now on the 1st floor. Right next to the entrance was a prime hunting ground, and right now, 3 groups of adventurers are already fighting slimes. He showed the audience a picture of adventurers fighting these monsters. The protagonist said that the more adventurers in a party, the less their personal earnings, but they can always count on the support of their comrades. In the afterlife, no one will need money, so always let his viewers prioritize their safety. The MC exhaled convulsively, thinking that he seemed to be getting used to this. He continued, he would recommend them hunting near this passage, but to be careful, as 2 slimes would be waiting for them along the way. He approached the chest and said that there was a treasure chest in a small room. It was easy to miss, so they should remember to look inside if they passed by this one. The protagonist suggested they open the chest. If there was a scout inside, they could quickly get rich. After peering inside, the protagonist pulled out a vial and said that a potion was inside. A scout is a rare item, usually found in purple chests. A new chest will appear in this location in 24 hours, so they should just be patient. Ryoji then showed the audience a piece of floor slab and said that stepping on it would activate a trap. It was a different color, so it was easy to spot. Suddenly, something hit him on the head, and he let out a gasp of surprise. The protagonist said that everything felt different in the helmet, which is why he fell into the trap. But they usually avoid them, right? In fact, he would never have stepped on it. He did this to make it easier for the viewers to understand. The MC continued, and so, having walked around the entire 1st floor, it was time to go down to the 2nd. The protagonist warned the audience that the dungeon's stairs were steep and narrow, so they should be careful when descending. Descending to the 2nd floor, Ryoji told the audience that goblins inhabited the 2nd floor. They were slightly stronger than slimes. Unless they had an adventurer's mark, There was a high chance they would kill them, so they shouldn't descend. Suddenly, before he could finish speaking, the protagonist slipped on a step and tumbled down. He said, puzzled, well, he did say the stairs were dangerous. Even though he had fallen, they should still be careful. At that moment, he suddenly heard a woman screaming for help. Ryoji turned his head in confusion and saw a girl named Yoko being pursued by goblins. Without a second thought, the protagonist activated his double-powered fireball, and 2 fiery projectiles curved around the girl and rushed toward the enemy, destroying them. The protagonist asked Yoko if she was okay. The girl, her voice stammering with fear, thanked him for his help. She added that her friend had been captured by goblins, but she had managed to escape. The protagonist thought she was very beautiful and replied, okay, he'll save her friends too. MC activated detection and, showing the girl the dungeon layout, asked if they were in the right room. Yoko didn't even have time to answer. The protagonist rushed forward at the speed of sound. Yoko was surprised. It was so fast. When Ryoji ran into the room he needed and saw Ken tied up, he exclaimed that he had come to his aid. The boy joyfully praised the god and shouted for him to save him. The protagonist was a little confused. What? Yoko's friend was a man? And an old-looking one at that. He finally decided he didn't care about this dungeon couple. MC activated the fireball, and what happened next filled him with confusion and fear. While activating the skill, he imagined Kei inviting Kayoko to explore the dungeon together after graduation, to which she happily agreed. And now the protagonist realized he'd misjudged the force of the blow and nearly destroyed the entire second floor. He thought in amazement, oh my, he hadn't overdone it with a spell like that in 10 years. Quickly using detection, he was relieved to see that he hadn't hit any adventurers. Ken thanked him in surprise and asked him what kind of magic had just been used. He'd never seen such destructive potential before. The confused protagonist replied that it was a powerful version of a fireball, even considered a fire cannon. Ken looked at him apprehensively and remarked that he'd asked for help, but wasn't that a bit much? The protagonist stared at the boy in amazement. He hadn't expected such a reaction. Ken continued. He understood that they wanted to practice powerful magic, but what would they do if the ceiling collapsed? He asked Ryoji to untie him quickly. The protagonist wondered why this sounded so preachy. He told the meticulous boy that he hadn't hurt anyone, and that the place would be completely restored by tomorrow. MC approached him and began untying Ken. At that moment, Yoko approached them, joyfully calling out to her ally. The protagonist was also relieved that she was safe and sound. The protagonist grumbled, if they're too low level for the second floor, they should level up better on the slimes from the first floor. If he weren't here, they'd both be dead by now. Ken snapped back angrily, shut up. They were just a little too guarded. Why is he lecturing them here? Yoko was confused by her partner's rudeness, and she said in surprise, lecturing? The adventurers continued on, and Ken told Yoko, seriously, sometimes these troublesome guys show up here, right? The girl told him to just ignore it. The protagonist wondered, will they stay on the second floor? At this rate, he'd have to keep an eye on them constantly. He wouldn't be able to create a map like this. It was time to retreat. The protagonist activated invisibility and stealth and vanished into thin air. Looking at the two, he wondered if perhaps he should warn them. He recalled Daenerys' words. In the dungeon, he was primarily responsible for himself. It would be foolish for him to die because of someone else's advice. She wasn't perfect either, so he had every right to disregard her advice if he thought it was wrong. The MC left the dungeon, found a suitable teleportation spot, and teleported home. A little later, he lay down on his bed and said there was still time before classes ended. Tomorrow he would need to conquer the second floor and find a place to film the dungeon. Judging by today's experience, he could easily complete 1 dungeon on a weekday and 2 on the weekends. That's 40 dungeons a month. So, in 3 months, he could film footage of the first and second floors of all the dungeons in the country. He was lucky that filming would end before he graduated. The problem was editing. The fastest way would be to cut the video, combine the necessary sections, and add subtitles. But he would like to make a stylish video. He should look for tutorials on how to do it. The protagonist settled in at the computer and happily exclaimed that his favorite seiyuu had released a new video. He should watch it. The next day, Amada asked the protagonist's golem what he had for lunch today. The golem replied that he wasn't hungry. The guy chuckled in confusion and offered to share his lunch with him. He had some yakisoba bread and a bun with bean paste. The golem told him that he, the 4 eyes guy, was a good guy after all. Amada choked in surprise and exclaimed, 4 eyes? Had he forgotten his name was Amada? The golem, biting into his bread, thanked him. He added that he would remember until the day he died that he shared his bun with him. Amada said sheepishly, he's exaggerating. They're friends after all, although, more likely, they weren't friends but rather brothers in spirit. The golem looked at him touchedly, then covered his eyes with his hand, his shoulders shaking. Amada asked him in surprise what was wrong. The golem replied that everything was fine, he just had something in his eye. The next day, the protagonist went back to the dungeon. Once again, on the second floor, he heard a cry for help. Yoko was begging for someone to save her. She could be heard screaming at the goblin not to come near her or touch her. She desperately begged Ken to help her. Tied up again, Ken shouted at the goblin to get away from her. The goblin glared at Yoko and grabbed her clothes. Ken watched in panic, unable to do anything. Yoko fought back as best she could. She asked her ally not to look at her, and the boy lowered his gaze in embarrassment. At that moment, The protagonist appeared and used his freeze skill. The goblins simply froze in place, unable to move. He told the adventurers that, while the freeze was in effect, the monsters would be unable to move. The MC added, looking at the astonished faces of the rescued men, "I was curious, so I came. Let them take advantage of this moment and escape to the first floor." He begs them to do so. Ken exclaimed joyfully, "They were saved. Let him untie the rope." Yoko, looking at the protagonist with gratitude, addressed him as if he were the mysterious mask. The protagonist activated the wind slash, and the ropes fell off Ken. Yoko thanked the mysterious mask. The partners hugged, overjoyed that they were saved again, safe and sound. Ken turned to the MC and told him that he was saving them for the second time. "Thank him so much for that." The guy added that he should forgive them for neglecting his advice back then. If not for him, they would no longer be alive. Ryoji answered him, he helped them of his own free will, no need for thanks. But why were they so stubbornly going to the second floor despite their low level? Ken said it was all because of a video called Conquering the Second Floor at Low Levels. It was a paid subscription. Yoko confirmed this, adding that it kept repeating that the author didn't really want to tell them about it, that only a select few knew, and so on. But it seemed it was all a lie. The protagonist looked at them with surprise and understanding. The protagonist leaned over his device and said, "His faithful servant, Proto-1, rise." The device responded, making a sound. He said, "Excellent. Everything worked." He had built a magical device into it that lightened the weight so there would be no sudden movements. MC asked the device, did he understand? The golem made a sound, and as it stood up, it hit the protagonist in the forehead. Ryoji, rubbing his forehead, exclaimed indignantly, "Why did he stand up so abruptly? If it had been anyone else, he would have completely smashed his head in." Proto-1 answered him. He thought this was a normal custom. The protagonist asked in bewilderment, "Who taught him this? He did it himself, right?" The golem said his body felt so light. Ryoji told him, he'd already said it, that he'd lightened his weight. He added that he shouldn't turn off the device, or it would break through the floor. Did he understand? The golem answered him. He understood. He would break through the floor immediately. The protagonist exclaimed, "No." He explained everything briefly to the device. He, the main character, had defeated the Demon King and returned to his original world. Now they were in the world he came from. Dungeons from another world had begun to appear here, and the world's resources had run out, so they had to descend into the dungeons to find new ones. Meanwhile, many adventurers had already fallen victim to false information about the dungeons. Proto-1 listened attentively to his creator. Ryoji continued, "Therefore, he wants to record his videos with accurate information and eradicate lies. If their civilization deteriorates, he won't be able to watch anime in peace." Did he agree with that? The golem asked him what his job was. Help hunt monsters in the dungeons? The protagonist said he wanted him to help edit the videos. He would never take him into the dungeons with him. Proto-1 wondered if it was because he was useless in the dungeon. The protagonist countered that it wasn't. He was an excellent assistant on the upper floors. The golem stared at him in confusion, as if asking what was the reason. Then MC spoke, "But that doesn't mean he won't take him with him. If anyone sees him, they could be in trouble. In this world, no one knows about golems yet." Proto-1 fell silent meaningfully, his whole appearance showing his offense. Ryoji thought he won't take him along even if he makes a sad face at him. It would be sad if he were broken by mistake. After a while, the protagonist said he'd edited the first video. Let Proto-1 use it as a template for the next ones. The golem replied that it obeyed him. How to edit videos? The protagonist told him to try searching online. He'd learned that himself. He'll teach him how to use a computer. The golem asked him again, "A computer? It's like a golem specializing in information gathering." MC confirmed his guess and showed him where the mouse and keyboard were. He added that he mainly needed to learn how to use them. The golem replied that he understood. The protagonist also told him never to open that folder he'd specially allocated. Did he understand? The golem said he understood. It was already late evening, and the protagonist wanted to sleep. He deactivated the golem and went to rest. The next morning, MC activated the golem's rise. Proto-1 told him it seemed to have had a random shutdown. The protagonist reassured him not to worry, that he'd temporarily disabled it. Ryoji told him he'd used teleportation to buy a laptop in Akihabara. All the files had already been transferred there, and he could use it freely. As the golem began to familiarize itself with the laptop, it noticed that the secret folder was missing. It contained a bunch of images of beauties with different skin tones. The protagonist exclaimed that he forgot to erase its memory. After some time, MC told his assistant that he was going to film a dungeon in Ueno Park, and he should watch and edit the available videos. The golem replied that he understood. Ryoji asked the device if he had any questions for him. The golem turned to its master and explained that he wanted to meet his family. Didn't he? Did he succeed? The protagonist looked at him in amazement and replied that he did. Indeed, he succeeded. The golem spoke, "So that's great." The protagonist felt sad when he remembered his parents. The golem immediately noted that he looked slightly sad. MC asked his assistant not to bring up this painful topic. Proto-1 said that he understood. After some time, Ryoji found himself in the Ueno Park dungeon. He thought that, compared to the dungeons that had appeared in this world, this park's dungeon could be considered the largest. The protagonist donned his gear and continued to ponder. Most adventurers go here. He'd filmed everything up to the 4th floor. It wouldn't hurt to film all the way to the 20th floor. Having reached the 5th floor, the protagonist thought he'd become completely accustomed to the helmet. Maybe he'd be able to film a smoother video today. He was surrounded by frenzied bees, but they didn't attack. The protagonist noted that simply defeating the monster wasn't that difficult. But if you don't want to damage materials, you need to strike in a way that leaves minimal damage. And to do that, you need to know all the monster's weaknesses and strike precisely. The protagonist shouted at the monsters that they wouldn't succeed and activated a wind slash, intensifying it sixfold. He knew that mad bees had weak joints, easily cut. In a matter of seconds, he easily dealt with his opponents. MC said, "The problem is solved. Now all that remains is to record an explanatory video and create a map." He wondered how his assistant was doing. Proto 1 was the first golem he had created in this world. Usually, after masters improve their skills, they destroy old golems and begin creating new ones. But he believed that the sentimentality inherent in the Japanese had gotten the better of him. So he spent all his free time improving Proto 1. And thanks to its improvements, it became more human. Proto 1 is so versatile that he could trust it with most of his chores. In another world, the golem was responsible for all the household chores. They had lived together for so long that he had long since become attached to it. In a sense, it had become his comrade, if not a member of the family. He awakened Proto 1 in this world to help him with video editing. But it's not just that. He took him into this world so he wouldn't be alone. Taking off his helmet, the protagonist activated the teleporter and found himself at home. He informed the golem that he had returned and asked him how the editing was going. The golem replied that 18 videos were ready. He would like the master to check everything himself. MC exclaimed in surprise, 18 videos? It would take about 15 minutes to process one video. How long did it take him? Hearing the answer from his assistant, the protagonist was even more surprised. 4.5 hours? Although, at double speed, it would take over 2 hours. Proto 1 replied that he had nothing to do while he waited for the processing. He wanted editing equipment. The protagonist replied that if they could make money from these videos, he would buy it for him. While watching the videos, the protagonist asked him why there were so many bad takes. The golem said that he did it on purpose. According to his research, this would help him get closer to the audience, humanizing his image. MC said that everything was fine as is. Let him just leave the parts where he looked cool. The golem asked him in surprise, "Cool?" Then he added that he understood. Ryoji was indignant. Let him not react as if he was not cool at all. The protagonist thought Proto 1 was much more fun. The month of February had arrived, and this month was the day of the entrance exams to the adventurer school. The protagonist went to pick up Kyoko, but her mother told him that she had already left. MC was surprised, really? The girl's mother continued. She thought they had agreed to go together. Did they happen to have a fight with her? She wished him a safe journey and good luck on the exam. Ryoji arrived at the Adventurer High School, walked to the exam venue, and sat down at a desk. He thought, at first he wasn't very eager to enroll here, but when he found out that this school allows skipping classes to delve into dungeons, he became more motivated. He needs to take these exams seriously and pass them. After the exam, Kei told Kyoko to stop communicating with the protagonist. The girl asked him, perplexed, why this? The guy answered her, she couldn't refuse him if he asked to join their party, could she? He continued, he didn't have a profession, so he couldn't contribute anything to the party. They were already risking their lives, and he didn't want the protagonist to cling to them like a parasite, and also cut into their share of the raids. Besides, if he was with them, they would never compare to other parties. Kyoko was upset by this, but she said that he seemed to be right. Ryoji was a nice guy, but this was too risky. An MC was passing by them. He thought with resentment. As his level increased, his hearing also improved, and he could hear their whispers too. And yet, these two had never even been to a dungeon, and already they were discriminating against people based on their profession. He heard Kei ask Kyoko, is she going home later? The girl answered him that it was so. The protagonist looked at his palm and noted that his level and lack of profession were a simple mistake, but he was too lazy to explain it. Kyoko saw him, she greeted him, and asked him how his exam was. He showed her a finger sign indicating that everything was fine. She was happy for him. Kei called her by name with irritation. She understood him, and told the protagonist that she would go to school with Kei, and that they would see each other again. The protagonist answered her, okay. He thought that all the misunderstandings would soon be cleared up anyway. He watched for a while as the two walked to school, hand in hand. MC decided he should also look around and go home. He wanted to find a convenient place to teleport. Sometime later, in March, the graduation ceremony took place. The protagonist felt a little sad. Amada told him goodbye, that they would remain friends forever. Ryoji wasn't at all opposed to this. The protagonist recalled his teacher's words about how, by law, they weren't allowed to enter the dungeon until they graduated from high school. He thought that, for the same reason, many would rush to the dungeons immediately after graduation. Kyoko would go there with this Kei. There was no doubt about it. He didn't want his best friend to die because of false information. Even though they had already had the graduation ceremony, they would officially remain middle school students until March 31st. MC stared at the clock, waiting for midnight. He figured there were 15 seconds left until the ban was lifted. When midnight struck exactly, the protagonist turned to Proto 1 and told him to upload the video. The golem replied that he was obeying his master's orders. He pressed the start button and announced that the dungeon exploration channel had begun. At the end of March, near the Ueno Park dungeon, adventurers were arguing among themselves. One of them shouted that it was their prey. Another man exclaimed claimed that he knew nothing. Whoever noticed it first would get it. He shouted furiously. Who would follow such a stupid rule? The boss called out to Kunimi and noted that it looked like this hunting ground was also overcrowded. He nervously remarked that they wouldn't make a penny at this rate. The guy asked what they should do. Kunimi replied that he suggested they leave and come back another time. Now, the dungeons weren't just frequented by laid-off employees like themselves or those who quit without leave, but also by young people who couldn't find work due to the labor shortage. The boss pointed out that it was possible to kill a slime even without an adventurer's mark, and the earnings would be higher than those of a regular office worker. He replied with a smile that with this influx, they wouldn't be able to earn as much as before. The guy asked if there weren't any good hunting grounds deeper in the floors. Kunimi replied that no one knew. It would be great if they had reliable information about the dungeons, but alas, only false information was circulating on the internet these days. He thinks many people still believe these fakes, which is why they're getting hurt. The boss, upset, said it was true. Many of them never returned from the dungeons. Meanwhile, Sarah and Tara were exploring the labyrinth. She, shining a flashlight, asked if this was the passage they'd mentioned in the video. Suddenly, a girl called out to her and warned her that there was an enemy behind her. Sarah was attacked by a slime, which began sucking her in. She screamed in horror for her to save her. Tara started running away and said it wouldn't work. After a while, she wrote online, saying this was no longer a joke. People should stop spreading false videos. Sarah died because of them. She filed a police report. Meanwhile, the worker and his colleague were reading the comments. She noticed that the negative comments had only been increasing lately. He replied that they all irritated him and that he needed to delete them all. Sometime later, at the central police station, Detective Yama furiously shouted that because of people like him and their videos, people were dying in droves. What was he even thinking? The worker, perplexed, asked if he was really to blame. It was stated everywhere that the information obtained was used at one's own risk. The lawyer told him to please ask him all questions first. Did he have proof that his client was the one spreading false information? Had he at least compared the video with the actual layout of the dungeon before jumping to conclusions? If he didn't stop this lawlessness, they would sue him for slander. The detective thought nervously, if only he had video footage of the dungeon. Sometime later, at the Takanasu TV building, the boss said that if they got video footage of the dungeon from the inside, it would be a gold mine. Let the cameramen film anything. Even the smallest fragment will do. The guy nervously replied that that was impossible. Electronics don't work inside dungeons. He asked with displeasure, was he really thinking of disobeying his superiors? It was their job, so shouldn't they solve the problem? No video, no contract renewal. After that, the cameramen went on the subway. One of them exclaimed with displeasure that this was complete nonsense. He just found an excuse to break their contract. He replied that in such a desperate situation, they had only one choice. The guy asked if he thought this was a shady approach. The cameraman replied that they would go broke one way or another. He hoped to make a fortune. They would sell the footage to the studio that offered the highest price. After some time, they went down to the first floor of the Ueno Park dungeon. One of the cameramen asked if the camera was working. He replied that nothing was working. And this is a dungeon camera developed by the most popular company? The guy excitedly pointed out that he had told him so. And how much did he pay for it? He nervously replied that 1,000,000 yen. He even took out a loan for this camera. This is bad. They didn't even give him severance pay. The assistant said they could sell the camera to someone else. Sometime later, on April 1st at 12 midnight, Proto One announced that the dungeon exploration channel was starting. The protagonist exclaimed in delight that this was amazing. They had posted over 100 videos with just one press of the enter key. The robot replied that this wasn't quite true. He had installed a scheduling program on the video hosting service, and the videos had been posted without any intervention. He noted in shock that he had posted the videos in advance. Does it matter? Wasn't he excited about the event itself? Proto One played a video in which the protagonist greeted everyone and announced that viewers had found their way to the dungeon exploration channel. He happily thought that this was the true beginning of his channel. Sometime later at Takashi's video studio, the cameraman exclaimed that this was bad. Let the boss take a look at this. He picked up a tablet and asked in shock, are these footage from a dungeon? Are these really real? He didn't see any signs of a computer-generated image. It's definitely not a fake, but how did he do it? The cameraman excitedly asked if they could borrow this guy's equipment, and then they wouldn't give it back to him. He replied that he'd been thinking about it for a long time, but he's quite the optimist. After a while, the worker reported to Yama that a video had been published directly from the dungeon. He asked in confusion how he knew it wasn't another fake. The guy replied that everything looked plausible. Let him see it for himself. The detective, having examined the materials, exclaimed that they needed to be on the safe side. Let him print out 50 frames from the video. This shot is right at the entrance. That's excellent. They'll go there and compare everything. After a while, people started discussing en masse, like what all the fuss was about. Apparently, they published a video from a dungeon. The main character's video was in full swing. On the news, a correspondent reported that there was currently a network outage throughout the country. The protagonist, seeing the statistics, happily noted that the number of views and subscribers was growing by leaps and bounds. Proto One replied that it was all thanks to his keen editing instincts. He didn't need any thanks. He smiled and said that was true. Thanks for that. The The robot sheepishly asked. He's serious. He knows where to press. He couldn't possibly hold back like that. The MC remarked that he was pleased to see the number of views and subscribers growing. However, he couldn't read the comments. Proto One explained that the network was overloaded. He nervously asked how this had happened. After all, this was his debut on the video hosting site. Sometime later, the White House descended into complete chaos. The president's advisors excitedly reported that a massive network outage was occurring across America. Neither the internet nor telephone service was working. They were suspecting a cyber attack by another country. The president himself nervously asked, "Do they already know which country is to blame?" One of them replied, "No, but that might seem crazy." The channel available worldwide was primarily a video hosting site. According to spyware, most phone conversations and emails were about this channel. The president asked, "Are they saying this is the cause of the outages?" And he was supposed to believe this nonsense? Who owns this channel? An advisor replied, "It's a Japanese account called the Dungeon Exploration Channel." The president watched one video and asked, "Are these footage from a dungeon?" He replied, "A well-crafted fake." The man called out to his granddaughter, Linda Bluestone, and told her to take a look at the video. She's America's top adventurer, and he'd like to hear her opinion. The girl agreed with a smile and, after examining the footage, remarked that she didn't know how he'd done it. The video is quite real. She even wondered what level he was. The president thanked her and took the tablet. The advisors reported that they'd requested his location from the video service. The account itself was Japanese, and the speech in the video was also in Japanese. Should they report their discovery to the Japanese government? The president replied no, they shouldn't reveal their hand. Linda, putting on a cowboy hat, said that after lunch she was heading to the Rocky Mountain dungeon, so if they prepared a camera for her, just like the guy in the video, she'd try to film the dungeon as well. After a while, the president began to wonder if Linda had changed her plans and gone straight to the dungeon. Perhaps the person with the video was a much higher level than her. And this girl hated losing. He said he wanted them to find equipment capable of working inside the dungeon. Although, should they film their dungeon capturing techniques? These videos could be a potential advantage in negotiations. From this day on, a global race will begin. They must be faster than other countries. Meanwhile, in Japan, the protagonist, playing with a robot, exclaimed in displeasure that he had lost again. He forbade him from using inventory items. Proto One replied that he understood everything and was ignoring the order. He nervously said, "Let him use whatever he wants. Damn it." At that moment, the accountant, Kijima, called on the phone. MC, perplexed, picked up the phone and said he was listening. The girl happily said that he had finally answered. She was already on her way. She hoped that he would agree to meet her at a family restaurant near the train station. He, perplexed, asked why she was calling so late. He even managed to get scared. She explained that it was about Ryoji's project. The protagonist replied that he would be there soon. Proto One wished him a safe journey and said he would focus on editing for now. Afterwards, the protagonist went outside and reflected on how he had opened the Furiari Project company, thinking about his future. Kijima was his tax accountant, whom he had hired at the time. On his orders, Proto One found a good professional who could keep secrets. His demands were high, but he also paid a lot. After some time, he arrived at the restaurant and, looking around, realized that Kijima hadn't arrived yet. It was his first time visiting a family restaurant at night. Afterwards, the girl herself came and apologized for the delay. The MC replied that everything was fine, he had just arrived. Kijima, with a serious expression, said that she suggested they sit somewhere quiet. He, looking her over, realized that there was sweat on her face. It seemed she was in a hurry. After some time they sat down at the table. She said that she apologized for calling him in the middle of the night. Maybe he wanted a snack? The protagonist replied that it wasn't necessary. The girl called the waitress and told her to set up the drink bar. She'd get a coffee. And he replied that he needed a soda. After that, Kijima went to the bar. The protagonist was surprised to see that she was working efficiently. After preparing the drinks, she approached him and said they would get straight to business. In 2 hours, the number of subscribers on his channel had surpassed 300 million. In the history of the internet, no one had accumulated that many, and the number continues to grow steadily. The MC beamed with happiness and asked, "Is this serious?" Kijima, smiling, said, "Please accept her congratulations." First, she wanted to clarify a few details. First, let him excuse her. "But are these videos real?" The protagonist agreed and paused. She wanted to understand if he was doing anything illegal. She wondered if other adventurers were capable of filming similar videos. He replied that no, it was simply impossible. He'd used special materials to repurpose a standard digital camera. Obtaining these materials required a huge level, around 900. Furthermore, even if they succeeded, they'd need to study magical engineering to know how and where to apply it. She should note that everything he'd said was a trade secret. Even if someone did manage to fulfill these two conditions, few people would have the knowledge of dungeons to create such tutorial videos. Kijima replied that she understood. She could assume he had a complete advantage over all potential competitors. MC agreed and thought that it would be a different matter if other heroes besides him went to this world, but there shouldn't be such a thing. She said he'd already met all the monetization requirements, so she thought they'd be approved. Their request would take about a week to be processed. Even with the most rough estimates, the annual revenue from the videos could reach several billion. The protagonist picked up his phone and noted that the video hosting site had just sent him a notification about monetization. Speaking of monetization, they wrote that they would provide him with additional incentive bonuses if he agreed to upload videos exclusively to their platform. Kojima replied that if he had no plans to take over other platforms, she would advise him to sign this exclusivity contract. In that case, the video hosting site would be responsible for catching pirates distributing his videos. The protagonist thoughtfully asked, "Pirated copies?" That was entirely possible. Fine, he'd sign the contract. After a while, he said they'd responded quickly. They'd already sent him all the documents for signature. According to the contract, he'd be paid $40 million annually. Kojima, shocked, noted that this was the big leagues. Furiari's project had only recently launched, and at this rate, sales weren't expected to be the best, so she was considering hiring a lawyer and a finance manager. What would he say about that? MC replied that she could do as she saw fit. She agreed, taking out her phone and saying that in that case, she had connections with companies in those fields. They could outsource some of the work to them. They charged quite a lot for their work, but with the projected sales, Ryoji's project could easily afford it. It wouldn't be a problem. For them, it was like a stone in the ocean. Besides, she could assure him that these companies would honestly admit their mistakes if anything happened. Contracts with them would be signed tomorrow. Did he have any questions? The protagonist, glancing at her shirt, asked if she liked cats. Kojima sheepishly apologized and explained that she'd been in her pajamas the whole time. Yes, she likes cats, even though she doesn't have any at home. He thought in surprise, so she's clumsy? He thought she was in a hurry. The protagonist said he didn't care, and she should forgive him for asking. Kojima said she was responsible for his finances, so he shouldn't be shy. She would cover all expenses. He thanked her for the treat, and after that, they went outside. The girl bowed and said that she apologized. She started to leave, but suddenly turned around and, apologizing, pointed out that with her invitation, she had allowed a minor to wander alone in the middle of the night. That was an unacceptable mistake on her part. She would accompany him home. MC replied that everything was fine. He lived nearby. Kojima said that it didn't work that way. Well, they were going. He pointed to the side and said that his house was there. After a while, they set off. The girl asked if he planned to continue uploading dungeon-crawling videos in the future. The protagonist agreed, adding that adventurers who could wisely gather and manage their resources sounded like a great idea. If their civilization began to deteriorate, he wouldn't be able to watch anime in peace, and he wanted money too. She replied with a smile that it was a good idea. She sincerely wished him luck. The whole world was thirsting for this knowledge. Who would have thought a 15-year-old boy could own this? If he had any problems in the future, he should feel free to contact her. She'll help in any way she can. MC thanked her with a smile and thought she was a good person. After a while, they approached his house. Kojima bowed with a smile and said she wished him good night. He reciprocated and wondered what kind of professional moves she had. He was worried about the woman being left alone on the street at night, so he used invisibility and stood next to Kojima until her taxi arrived. The next day, the protagonist woke up and wished the robot good morning. Proto-1 reported that the comment section was getting out of control. He wished he could handle it himself. He asked with a smile, "What's going on?" A bunch of comments expressing gratitude and support. The robot replied that most of the complimentary comments were from abroad. The comments from Japanese users were half negative. The most common comments are that it's fake, followed by, "He tried the strategy and it worked," and lastly, "He must be a freak behind the mask." The protagonist asked in confusion, What do they have here? Are they really praising him? Where is all this? He started reading the negative comments and shocked, wondered, what the hell is that? Proto-1 noted that there were also grateful comments, so he shouldn't be sad. MC replied that he was fine. He'd expected something like that. The robot said he thought he should look at the little tsundere's comment, and then he'd perk up. He replied that he was feeling great as is. The girl herself said that he shouldn't focus only on filming videos. It's not as important as him, right? There's nothing good about that at all. The protagonist, in complete shock, asked, is she an angel? Proto-1 replied that he should be praised more often. He remarked that something similar had happened in another world. The robot said he was right. The anonymous ads there were simply terrible. The protagonist replied that it wasn't so much. He should not respond to comments. He reflected on how, when he had just debuted as a hero, there had been a battle between the multinational army and the demon army. MC remembered Daenerys saying that he had done an excellent job. Thanks to him taking on the main forces, the allied army was able to achieve a crushing victory. Now the whole world knew he was a hero. He asked if he really needed this recognition. Wasn't defeating the Demon King enough? She replied with a smile that he had a lot to do for that, including gaining recognition. Well, it was time for her to go to the council meeting. The protagonist agreed with a smile and thought that he wasn't sure he completely understood her. But the main thing was that she was happy. Sometime later, during the council, the king said that she had been through a lot in that battle. Ryoji's success was amazing, but all of this was too strange. Didn't the Demon King's army fall too quickly? Perhaps he conspired with the Demon King. They suspect he's just pretending to be a hero. In that case, isn't she involved too? First of all, it should be noted that transporting people from other worlds is simply impossible. Daenerys excitedly exclaimed that there was nothing strange about that. The reason was that Ryoji's level was incredibly high. His limits were different from theirs. Besides, she received the gift of summoning a hero from the goddess Lunameria herself. The people in the hall asked that if that were true, then why didn't she summon another hero right then and there? Let her admit that the hero was just a figment of her imagination to boost her standing in the International Alliance, right? The boy's name is Ryoji, right? Frankly, that boy scares them. The girl tearfully replied that she didn't care if they were going to insult her, but she asked them not to slander Ryoji. He was their savior, risking himself for this world. The advisors began to mutter among themselves that it was all women. Some thought it was too strange, while others believed her. They had no proof yet. After a while, MC began to think about how Daenerys had been silent the entire way back to the kingdom, and when they finally returned, she'd locked herself in her room, and the plan to conquer the Demon King began to slow down. He knocked on the door and, calling out to her, said he'd finished all the dungeons in her plan. Could he choose the next dungeon himself? Daenerys replied that she didn't mind. She needed to talk to her family and the nobles, otherwise a lot of problems would arise. He should forgive her for causing him problems. The protagonist, perplexed, asked again, "Problems? Did she mean he hadn't understood anything lately?" The girl smiled and said she thought that if she put in the effort to save the world, everyone would support her, but it seemed that wasn't the case. He asked in surprise, "Seriously, what happened?" Daenerys replied with a smile that it was nothing. She didn't know why she was sad. She loved this world too much, so she would continue to fight the Demon King to the end. Well, let him try his best, too. The protagonist thought he couldn't do anything about it. In the present, he explained that he had learned about it a little later. Proto 1 said he remembered something similar. The princess brought back memories. MC wondered if Daenerys had felt the same way back then as he did now. He wondered, so what were they talking about? The robot asked mockingly. Had he gone crazy? The protagonist asked. They were talking about the comments under the video, right? Proto 1 said there were too many for him to control. Let him deal with it himself. Did he want to leave things as they were or close the comments section? If he closed the section, there would be no more worries. On the other hand, they wouldn't be able to see their subscribers' opinions. He replied that everything was clear to him. Then he should leave it alone. Proto 1 noted that if he left things as is, he wouldn't have to work extra hard. On the other hand, he'd have to constantly see negative comments. The MC, perplexed, asked why he kept explaining. The robot irritably replied that he needed to finish the job. Note, truly terrible comments are blocked by the platform itself as a security measure. He replied with a smile that everything was perfectly clear to him. He was doing a good job. He should leave the comments alone. Proto 1 happily remarked that he felt very refreshed. The protagonist said he was going to go film a video. The robot wished him a safe journey and added that they were running out of material, so he should film as much as he could. Sometime later, on the 27th floor of the Ueno Park dungeon, the protagonist, having donned his gear and started recording, noticed that the 27th floor was a regular labyrinth. The main monsters on this floor were black scorpions. Wait, he forgot his helmet. Damn, he'd have to refilm everything. He thought about it. He didn't want to do anything. He'd take the day off today. After a while, MC returned home and, lying on his bed, asked if Keiko had watched those videos. Proto 1 asked if she was his childhood friend. His videos were so popular that it would be strange if she hadn't watched them yet. Confused, he asked, "Is it really that big of a deal?" The robot happily replied that they were talking about him on TV, in newspapers, radio, magazines, and even on anonymous blogs. The Dungeon Exploration channel had become the hottest topic everywhere. A special news broadcast was about to start on TV. The protagonist said he should check it out. After a while, he turned on the news. The presenter said that about a year ago, dungeons began to form all over the world. At the same time, the Earth's natural resources were rapidly depleted. Electricity supplies also began to decline. There were attempts to use nuclear and wind power, but they couldn't handle the required loads. Acute problems with logistics and the manufacturing industry arose. Furthermore, due to the depletion of natural resources, infrastructure development came to a standstill. Many companies went bankrupt, leading to a deteriorating economy. Some began to predict the inevitable fall of humanity. But it turned out that mana stones obtained from monsters could be processed into fuel. This changed the situation dramatically. Moreover, all minerals could also be mined in dungeons. Dungeon exploration became humanity's new hope. Proto 1 mentioned that, speaking of which, the Iwaki Industries company was making great strides in processing mana stones. He would like to buy their shares. The protagonist remarked that he'd learned some strange things. If he was sure he wouldn't end up in the red, he wouldn't mind. After all, they'd gotten paid for the video hosting contract. The host explained that defeating the slimes on the first floor didn't even require an adventurer's mark. So many had flocked to the dungeons to earn money. Surviving on the second floor and below required a mark and a high level. Modern weapons are practically useless against the monsters from the dungeons. Electrical devices don't work there at all. This slowed the speed of exploration, as without modern technology, exploration was practically impossible. The monsters themselves are powerful, which has led to a large number of deaths and seriously injured researchers. Currently, the death toll is approximately 10 million. Proto1 noted that they don't talk about their channel at all. The host said that the viewers are watching an interview with a dungeon expert, Professor Shinohara. The man said that, unfortunately, no one knows as much about dungeons as he does, and they underestimate the danger of these places. According to his assessment, even with the resources extracted from the dungeons, human civilization faces inevitable degradation. They can only slow this process. And yet, despite all these circumstances, a major platform recently posted videos with correct strategies for exploring dungeons. The video source is the Dungeon Exploration Channel, also known as DEC. The host added with a smile that this channel already has all the information about the first floors of more than 100 dungeons in Japan. Detailed information about monsters, accurate maps. This channel was the first to record video from inside a dungeon. How did they do it? They managed to interview DIC himself. The protagonist, perplexed, asked again. An interview? Proto1, surprised, asked when he had managed to give an interview. He replied that he hadn't done anything. An actor dressed as the protagonist appeared on camera. He greeted everyone and said that he couldn't sit by and watch the dwindling population, so he decided to record these videos. It looks like some frail old man decided he was a dungeon expert. Let them tell him. Isn't he a fraud? Have they seen his decrepit face? He's probably never even been inside a dungeon. The MC was perplexed, wondering who this was. But he agreed about the old man. The actor added that he was the only one right, and now he was saying goodbye to everyone. The host said it was all an exclusive interview. Proto1 noted that this imposter's helmet was just like his. The protagonist furiously exclaimed that the design was completely different. He wouldn't let it go. There was no forgiveness for him. Sometime later, he came to Kijima's office and said he wanted to do something about this imposter. She replied that she would help him with this matter. First, he should contact Muto law firm, and since legal costs were an expense, his taxes would be reduced. She would like to thoroughly investigate this matter to prevent something like this from happening again. Would he allow her to do so? The MC asked if he was imagining things or if she was bragging. The girl replied with a smile that he wasn't imagining things. She wouldn't leave them a chance. He said that then he would leave everything to her. Kijima added that before he left, she'd like to consult with him about one thing. Had he seen those popular videos yet? Confused, the protagonist asked, which videos? She showed him footage of a woman claiming to be the mother of the author of DEC. Let them forgive her for causing them so much trouble. Another man said he was DC's older brother. Let people forgive him for causing them so much trouble. Another guy introduced himself as DC's former classmate and said he'd tell them about his student life. Kijima added that there were other self-proclaimed relatives and friends. Let him clarify. He doesn't know any of them, right? MC agreed, adding that he'd only revealed his true identity to her, so he had no idea who they were. The girl became embarrassed and said she'd then ensure no one dared imitate him. They'd need to organize a group to address this issue from all angles. The protagonist happily reflected that he could always rely on her. She asked if it was possible. Could he record a video formally filing a lawsuit for slander? She wanted to hammer it into the heads of anyone still thinking of profiting from him. He agreed with a smile and said he'd film and upload it today. Kijima thanked him and apologized for wasting his time. The protagonist replied that he should be thanking her. She asked if the research videos were going well. He turned around and, perplexed, agreed. Kijima smiled and said that she actually rewatched his videos very often. It was very exciting. She hadn't acquired the adventurer's mark, but watching his videos made her feel like one. It made her incredibly happy, and everyone around her seemed happy too. They said his videos were helping their fellow adventurers. She was eagerly awaiting his new videos. After some time, MC happily returned home. Proto1 noticed that he seemed pleased. Had something good happened? He replied with a smile that everything was fine. He would go and film the video that Kijima asked him to make. The robot happily wished him a safe journey. Sometime later, at the entrance to the dungeon, the protagonist noticed adventurers and thought about how crowded it seemed. He wanted to record a video in a place where no one was. Maybe there weren't so many people in the depths. He used the detection skill and, noticing people, wondered how crowded even the deepest hunting grounds were. Could it be because of his video? Suddenly, the protagonist noticed Keiko and the guy next to her and wondered in surprise, was it her and Kei with her? But their party only consisted of 2 people. He used the invisibility and stealth skills and approached them. At this point, Keiko asked fearfully, is he sure everything will be okay? Kei replied with a smile that he was sure. After all, they had watched the Dungeon Exploration Channel's videos and bought equipment from Iwaki, and if anything bad happened, he would protect her. They both became embarrassed and held hands. MC, peeking at them, wondered if he had seen something inappropriate. Let them forgive him. They both had adventurer's marks, and they had watched his videos. Therefore, nothing serious should happen. He would leave them alone. After a while, Proto 1 showed him footage of the protagonist in a suit, saying he planned to sue the imposters pretending to be him and his acquaintances. That would be the only announcement today. Let them wait for the next Dungeon Exploration Channel videos. He noted with displeasure that he had used bad takes again. The robot replied that it was all because it was fun. Sometime later, his house rang. The MC walked out, wondering who it could be. He opened the door and saw Keiko. She wished him good morning and remarked that they hadn't seen each other in a while. Maybe they should go together to find out their results. The protagonist, perplexed, agreed and asked why she wasn't with Kei. The girl nervously told him that he had cheated on her, which is why she had dumped him. He, shocked, thought about how he had been so sweet to her. After a while, they boarded the bus and hit the road. Keiko asked if he knew adventurers were so popular. Even at the exit of the dungeon, a ton of fans were already waiting for them. He hadn't been to the dungeon yet, had he? The protagonist replied that he was there every day. He wondered if he was the only one who entered using invisibility. The girl asked if he had contacted his former classmates. He would have invited someone to meet. The MC replied that he and Yamada communicated through Messenger. She noticed something odd about him. He didn't seem like the adventurers she knew. He didn't even have a profession. He replied that his profession wasn't showing up. It could be a simple bug. Keiko smiled and said, "Just keep your cool." The protagonist replied that he wasn't sad, and there was no need to cheer him up. He didn't like it. Did she understand? He thought about how this girl hadn't changed. He was glad she was doing well. Keiko smiled and asked if he'd seen the new issue of Delta. She really liked their handiwork. The protagonist replied that he hadn't decided between print and digital. After a while, they approached the adventurer's school. Seeing a multitude of cameramen, the girl asked in surprise, "What's that?" Suddenly, a reporter approached her and said with a smile that they were from a local channel. Would she give them a minute? She could tell from their uniforms that they were students at the adventurer school. Right? Could they tell them their level and job? Keiko replied with a smile that she was a level 2 warrior. The reporter asked, "What about him?" MC replied with a smile that he had reached level 1500 yesterday. Raising that from level 1490 was a difficult task. Even the Dark Dragon barely helped. His job was hero. The woman remarked in surprise that this was creepy. They were thanking them for their time. Keiko said he was as usual. The protagonist, perplexed, thought that he told the truth. After a while, they entered the school. The girl noticed that they were sorting students into classes based on their grades. Those with the highest scores were sent to Class A, while those with the worst grades were sent to Class E. He replied that then he should be in Class A. The protagonist began reading the list, perplexed, wondering what he should make of this. His name wasn't in Class A. As his level increased, so did his intelligence. He had prepared seriously for these exams, so he should be among the top passers. Could there have been some mistake? Keiko, also studying the list, nervously noticed that Kei was in Class A. How that made her angry. MC wondered if this guy was in deep trouble. She found her name and said she was in Class B, a class lower than this liar. He asked, "That's one of the top classes, right?" He was congratulating her on it. Keiko noticed that she didn't see his name there. The protagonist turned around and replied that he was supposed to be in Class A, but apparently they didn't put him in because of a mistake. He needed to go and ask in the staff room. Suddenly, the girl said she found it. He was in Class E. He was in complete shock and thought that he didn't understand anything. 10 years had passed since he was kidnapped and summoned to another world. All these years, he risked his life and fought monsters as a hero. He defeated the Demon King, saved the entire world, reached level 1500. But he ended up in Class E, one of the worst? MC, completely shocked, said that everything was clear to him. E must mean extra class, right? Amazing. He had a good feeling about this class. Keiko replied that that was not the case. It was the usual order A, B, C, D, E. His class was the worst. Was he okay? He just turned a little pale. He asked, perplexed, "Is it that bad?" "Fine, he'll go to his class." After a while, the protagonist entered the classroom and, sensing the oppressive atmosphere, thought that most of the people here had already given up hope. Well, he hoped they'd come to their senses a little later. But how did he end up in Class E? After a while, Sato entered the classroom and, introducing herself, said she would be the E-class homeroom teacher. She was glad to meet them. They might have ended up here, but each of them remained a chosen person with the mark of an adventurer. Once they increased their level and strength, they could change classes at any time. So from now on, they would be diving into the dungeon often. She hoped they would quickly get used to it. MC wondered in surprise, could he change classes? If he could prove his strength, he could be promoted to Class D. No, with his abilities, even Class A was no problem. But how could he prove it? He looked at his level and thought he had a bad feeling about this. Perhaps escaping from Class E was impossible from the start. Sato said with a smile that they had to form a party before entering the dungeon. Surviving alone would be too difficult, and if one of them died, she would lose her bonus. When creating a party, they should remember to consider job balance. Several students mentioned their jobs, and one girl wondered if they could form a 4-person party. Suddenly, Mohawk, a student, approached the protagonist and asked what his job was. He reflected that he had always fought alone, so he had long wanted to try something like this. The boy called out to him with disapproval and pointed out that he was talking to him. What was his job? The MC answered with a serious expression that he didn't have a job. Suddenly, the entire class burst into laughter, and everyone started shouting that he didn't have a job. How did he even get into this school? They saw him cause a scene during the level test. The protagonist was perplexed, thinking that he, the former hero who returned from another world, had become a dropout from Class E and a total outcast. Everyone started shouting that he is jobless. He thought about how just a minute ago they were all in despair, but as soon as they found a scapegoat, they immediately changed. This shocked him greatly, and the teacher didn't even try to stop them. Sato exclaimed in displeasure, "Shut up. Ryoji was simply special, that's all." His physical attributes and test scores were the best among all of them, and he was placed in Class E solely by decision of the principal and his vice principal, so they shouldn't dare make fun of him. MC thought that he knew it. After all, he was the best on the test. Suddenly, Sato couldn't help but laugh and remarked that he was jobless. He nervously pondered that he now understood why she had been assigned to Class E. Mohawk asked mockingly, "So he really doesn't have a job?" If he even realized how useless he was. Bullcut joined them and asked if maybe he should quit this school before he dragged them down. Sato worriedly noted that this was too harsh a statement. Maybe someone would take Ryoji into their party? The students responded with ridicule that this was simply impossible. No one would risk their lives by bringing useless baggage into a party. Mohawk leaned toward him and with a sly smile said that they would call him unemployed for the next 3 years. Did he want to bet that he would be afraid to go into the dungeon? The protagonist, with a calm face, said that with the teacher's permission, he would go into the dungeon. She was shocked by his words, and the whole class was perplexed. Seeing this, he wondered if she hadn't heard him. MC repeated that with her permission he would go to the dungeon. Okay? Mohawk, with a sly smile, put his hand on his shoulder and asked who would go to the dungeon with him. Jobless. He brushed the hand off his shoulder and replied that he would go alone. Sato, surprised, said that he should stop this. She would get into trouble if he died. The protagonist started to walk to the exit and replied that explaining to them was a waste of time. He was glad to meet them. After that, he left the office. Ponytail remarked that listening to his chatter was a waste of time. Sato, with a smile, said, "Come on. Let them stop." At that moment, Bullcut approached Mohawk and asked what was wrong. He replied in surprise that he had brushed his hand off very easily, and he had been holding him tightly. The guy grinned and asked if he was weaker than a jobless. Mohawk nervously considered the fact that he was a level 3 martial artist. After a while, MC went outside and thought that this wasn't how he'd imagined school life, but oh well. It's good that the school is close to the dungeon. He felt like he was going through the official procedure for visiting the dungeon for the first time. It was a hassle, but he needed an ID to be allowed to leave during class. He arrived at the dungeon and thought about the lockers. They even had a changing room. True, it was a fee, but he thought the government would soon remove the fee to attract adventurers. Incidentally, the Adventurers Guild in another world also offered similar services. He was pleased to know they cared about their comfort. No one was around, so he could go straight to the 1000th floor using the dungeon core. After some time, the protagonist teleported to the desired floor and began to wonder if the Dark Dragon was the boss of the Ueno Park dungeon. Suddenly, a huge monster began to attack him. He dodged it and wondered if a sharp retreat would likely cause it to breathe fire. He countered with a prepared freeze spell. In an instant, the protagonist destroyed the boss, and a pile of treasure appeared nearby. He happily thought about the dragon's slaying. 5 seconds, 31 milliseconds. A new record. It dropped a rare spellbook. Level Drain 2. His Level Drain skill was hardly useful, as higher level monsters had resistance to it. There should be an improved version in Volume 2. He'd read that later. Sometime later, the protagonist returned home. Proto 1 greeted him and remarked that he was up quite early today. Hadn't he really taken a video? He agreed with a smile and added that he'd only defeated the dragon as usual. Today, they will finally start filming a video for the second channel. After a while, the MC put on his mask and apron and thought about how scared he was. He was incredibly nervous. Proto 1 said he'd turn on the camera in 3 seconds. He nervously asked if he could count faster. After a while, the protagonist began explaining that after they defeated the slime, they shouldn't forget to collect its slime. It actually has many uses. Today, he'll teach them how to make a potion from it. Stop filming, he was really nervous. Proto 1 replied that everything was fine. He began explaining that the potion can drop randomly from any monster, so there's always a chance to get it even at level 1. He thinks there have been such people before. It's currently quite expensive, so anyone who's gotten one is really lucky. But in fact, the potion can be crafted by hand. The main ingredient is medicinal moss, which grows on the 26th floor. They'll need slime as a stabilizer. Without it, the potion will quickly spoil, which is impractical for long expeditions. Slime acts as an excellent preservative, preserving all the healing properties of the moss, so it was time to get to work. After a while, MC happily showed the bottle and said that the potion was ready. Now he would try it out. He drank the contents and said it turned out well. He even felt his skin become smoother. Making a potion by hand isn't that difficult. The main thing is practice. Well, they'll see each other again. After that, Proto 1 stopped filming and said it turned out great. The protagonist asked in surprise, "That's it? and without retakes. The robot happily noted that if they reshot every shot he wasn't happy with, they'd never film anything. The protagonist excitedly asked if he could at least remove the shots where he starts mumbling. Let him promise, okay? The next day, he woke up and greeted the robot. Proto One reported that the second channel had already surpassed 3 million subscribers. The MC asked in surprise, really? Almost as many as the main channel. That's surprising. The robot added that the prices for slime and medicinal moss on the government procurement website were rising by the minute. He noted that they seemed to be short on medicinal moss. Proto One suggested that selling potions cheap could save the lives of many adventurers. The protagonist agreed, saying that he had plenty of moss, but selling it all at once would attract attention. Maybe he should sell it in increments to make it less noticeable? He thought that having entered the adventurer school, he could easily enter the dungeon at any time. He also made a ton of videos about safe dungeon crawling. The number of views has already surpassed 1 billion. Hundreds of adventurers leave comments expressing their gratitude. He enjoys being useful. And so the second semester began at this pace. After a while, MC arrived at school. The students were all buzzing about the new student, saying she was so beautiful, like she was completely out of their league. They only had 3 such beauties in their school. Hearing this, the protagonist thought, yeah, right, they'd been told they were transferring a foreigner. Well, 3D girls weren't his thing. At that moment, he never would have imagined he'd get close to them. Earlier in the government building, the president looked at his tablet and said Ryoji was just an ordinary, average high school student. Linda asked if he really owned the Dungeon Exploration channel. He didn't look strong. The president said that was her concern too. No one would have thought a sweet angel like her could be the best adventurer in the US, level 34. Linda awkwardly asked him not to talk like that in public. Why was he always looking at the camera? The man remarked that they were trying to film covertly, but he kept turning around every time they wanted to take a photo, even though the best team was doing the surveillance. The girl said he probably had detection skills. Linda looked at the protagonist sheepishly, and the president said that he was obviously aware of the US surveillance, so they stopped the operation. But his reaction to the filming, not every high school student has such courage. The president said he needed her opinion. What are the chances that another country might recruit him for dungeon exploration? Linda replied that none of them mattered. She'd seen him conquer the 100th floor of the Ueno Park dungeon, and it was simply breathtaking. The military didn't stand a chance against him. To force him, they'd need an adventurer of a higher level. She didn't know Ryoji's level, but he was definitely over 100. The president said that he still wants him to become part of the US adventurers. Could she win his heart? It was, of course, for the sake of national interests, but there was more to it than that. As her grandfather, he thought he was the perfect candidate for her, and his courage had helped save the world from many losses. Perplexed, Linda asked him not to joke like that. Had he forgotten that she was only 16? He replied that it wasn't a joke. Ryoji was 16 too. Linda thought that after such words, only one thing came to mind. He seemed like an ordinary guy, but in reality, he was the owner of Desi, the greatest adventurer and the dream of all female adventurers. The very same protagonist and her? The president asked what was going on with the Japanese government. His aide replied that they hadn't taken any action yet, only considering the idea of introducing a special tax for streamers. His project, Furuya, he believed the government was waiting for the annual financial results to be released. It's difficult to hide your information from the Japanese tax service. So many details of his secrets would be revealed at that point. The president remarked that Ryoji's peaceful life would last another couple of months at best. In the present, a schoolboy called out to the protagonist and asked angrily how he'd ended up in E-class. Was he planning on enrolling in B-class in the second semester? Like him, E-class is for the lowest of the low. MC, perplexed, thought this was the same guy who'd pestered him on the day he'd entered. The schoolboy added that he understood it would be difficult for an unemployed person to join the team, but sitting in E-class was a waste of time. Did he understand? He thought, waste of time, what is he talking about? The student turned to leave and asked to be lifted up, so he would wait for him in Class B. Ryoji watched him go, admiringly, and thought about how he wished he could be like him. The student asked sarcastically if they had seen what just happened. The girl asked, will he wait? Aren't you ashamed of him for saying such things? A classmate remarked, embarrassed simply because she had overheard him speak. Perhaps that was what constitutes shame. After a while he came to the classroom, and Sato joyfully announced, he's alive! If a corpse remains in the dungeon for more than 24 hours, the dungeon itself will absorb it. If he wanders the dungeon alone, he could die and be absorbed, since there will be no one to carry his body away. The protagonist looked at her with displeasure and thought, the teacher doesn't change. She came to her senses and exclaimed, she almost forgot. Director Iwaki had called him, and he had to go see him immediately. He asked, Principal, what does he want from him? Sato told him to remember to tell him she was a wonderful teacher. MC walked down the hallway, thinking, wonderful teacher? You couldn't tell from her. And then there was the principal's office. Suddenly, he noticed Isabella coming out of the office. She looked straight at him and bowed in greeting. He thought about how she was looking right at him. Isabella passed him and he thought, this girl is just like the main character of this season's popular anime, 9 Men. The protagonist knocked on the principal's office door and, upon entering, said that he was Ryoji from Class E, so he was coming in. Tanaka suddenly appeared behind him, but he grabbed his arm and pinned him to the floor. Tanaka exclaimed in displeasure. That's impossible. He's a level 25 assassin. And yet, he was grabbed by a level 1 jobless guy? MC looked at him and thought, there are assassins targeting him in this world too. Could this really be the principal?